A very good afternoon, everyone. Can I have your attention, please? A very warm welcome for the second training session of Pune Model United Nations 2015. We're here today, and Rudranil will be explaining the procedure followed at Pune Model United Nations 2015. Allow me to share a small story with all of you. After the first session got over in January, in the month of July, we started an organization called Youth for Youth. And this was after a workshop that I had attended for 10 days in Karnataka. What I found after I came back was that there are people from different countries who are in India and working towards the society. And we Indians are not doing anything at all. We're all busy in our own lives. We don't have time for anybody else. And that's how we started Youth for Youth. We didn't have any funding. We had nothing. Just a motto to do something. And in July, in the first month itself, we started a mass collection drive. We collected 150 kgs of clothes, books, toys, shoes from different people, from different places all over Pune. And we sent them to a school in Karnataka, in a school that is in a village. After that, to get funds, we had our own bake sale. So at Chocolate Story in Kalyani Nagar, we had our own bake sale, and we had those funds coming in. After that, 2nd to the 8th of October, the Joy of Giving Week, was one huge time that we were looking up to. And I'm proud to say that during the Joy of Giving Week, the team of Youth for Youth collected 2,500 kgs of clothes, books, toys, footwear, and other things from over 5 schools in Pune, from over 35 societies all over Pune, and we donated it to over 5 orphanages, 6 schools, and other places. My point here is, if in case you have the determination to do something, don't let that idea go. Keep hold of it. You will succeed. And that's how, after Pune Model United Nations 2015 in January, we will be planning fundraisers also for different organizations who really need it. And we'd love to send you all emails regarding that as well, so that even you all would know. Next time when you go back home, in my signature in the email, you'll find a link to the Youth for Youth Facebook page. I'd request all of you to kindly go once and check that particular page. Even that one like that you click on would create a lot of difference for us. Without further ado, I'd request our Secretary General, Mr. Rudranil Chattopadhyay, to take over the dais.
Good afternoon, all members present over here. Couple of things that we need to instruct you on before we start. First things, can we guess? Thank you. Switch off your cell phones, electronic gadgets, as we would not require them during the course of the orientation. If you're getting a very important call, or you can put it on silent, If you're getting a very important call which you cannot avoid, we can totally understand. Please excuse yourself and go answer it. Second thing, when you are speaking into the cordless mic, ensure that it is on, working, and your voice is audible till me. Thirdly, if I'm not audible at any point in time to you, stop me and ask me to repeat or increase my volume or pitch. All right? Because at the end of the day, you want to go back from here learning something or understanding where you have come from. And these small logistical issues should not be a hindrance to it. At the same time, okay, So visibility of the screen is another issue that has been brought to my notice. This time we have increased the font from yesterday, and we've also checked, so hopefully you all will be able to see the screen properly. At the same time, I'll be reading out the stuff which is provided on the screen for your benefit. So in any case, you're not able to understand or read something which is there on the screen, please ask me to repeat myself. Is that clear? Thank you. So how many of us are here for the first time, in the sense that we didn't come for the training sessions yesterday? All right, quite a decent number. So yesterday in our session, we covered the conference and the Pune Model UN conference, the structure of the organization, and how the conference stands out from other MUN conferences that are conducted. And along with that, we addressed an important concern of research that delegates had, and some key points were provided as to what could be the possible method in which research can be carried out. So in today's session, we would be quickly going through the research module once again, a quick recap of the research module, after which we would be proceeding towards the procedure of the conference, the way in which you are supposed to use your research and conduct yourself as diplomats of your country, right? Okay. So firstly, going through a quick understanding of how students benefit from a Model UN conference. Role-playing is an important aspect of this simulation, and students come in as diplomats of the country. They exercise their power that has been given to them by their state and their government, and they express the will of their state in an international organization. It deepens your research abilities, your public speaking skills, a general discipline towards discussing any particular topic that has been provided to you that can be helpful to you throughout your life. You are faced with problems which basically are your agenda, and you develop a skill to solve and resolve these issues in a setting which would involve teamwork. When we are talking about teamwork, an essential aspect is negotiation. You need to convince the others as to what your point is and try and understand their view at the same time. Consensus building, a general notion of agreement between all your members who are present in the same committee. At the same time, conflict resolution at a multinational level. And we also understand how the UN per se functions at a global level, and meetings at the United Nations are conducted. You also tend to get in touch with a lot of people whom you have not met before, and these lasting relationships can go ahead and help us at a professional level in future. All right, so let's, is there any concern out here? None, all right. So the simulation of any body happens at certain levels. Now, the United Nations is a huge organization. It has its own organizational structure. It has its own method of functioning. It has its own setup in which it takes certain decisions. And we could either simulate only one of these parts, or we could simulate the United Nations at multiple levels. So I'll be just briefing you with the levels at which Pune Model United Nations simulates or replicates the United Nations. The first one is that it's a model or replica of the original United Nations conference. We replicate the United Nations at a structural level. Now, what does that mean? The committees that you have, the councils and the commissions in which you are part of, it exactly is based on the committees and commissions and councils of the United Nations. There are certain events and simulations which come up with unconventional committees like the European Union or the African Union, or I've even heard committees which simulate the Ministry of Magic, UEFA, and there was one random invitation that I received which said it was a super MUN. So what was a super MUN? We will simulate superheroes meeting together. So you are Harry Potter, you're Darth Vader, Superman, Batman. So these are unconventional simulations, but they are not United Nations at all. So when we are talking about Pune Model United Nations, that's where the committees come into picture, exact simulation of the UN committees, followed by the organizational model. Now, you enter the picture when you are registering as a delegate, and from there on, you get your country or committee allocations. But who are the people working behind the scenes? Who is it that generates this entire conference from day one? So we basically start our preparation somewhere in April end or May. And from then till January end and February first week, technically our entire conference preparations keep going on, even after the conference has ended. So in the organizational model, we have the most important element, the secretariat of the conference. Our secretariat is divided into departments and directorial structures that replicate the UN secretariat in the exact manner. You may not come across them immediately, but during the days of the conference, you will find them functioning all over around you, and they are the people who are actually making this conference happen. At the same time, the second most important component of the organizational model are you delegates. You are representing the states which have come together to form the United Nations. The UN Charter starts with a very interesting line, "We the peoples of the United Nations." So the UN is nothing if there are no member states participating in it. The UN exists because we have given the United Nations that power to exist, and who are we? The delegates of different countries. So you are the second most important part in this organizational structure. And thirdly, the conference officials. Now, conference officials are the experienced Model UN participants who have taken part in Model UN conferences before. We have selected them through a rigorous process of application followed by telephonic interviews, and these will be the people who would moderate and spearhead your discussions in the committee. All right? And the third level of simulation is called the functional model. Now, what is the functional model? The rules of procedure that you're going to follow in the conference are exactly as the UN functions. There are some modifications which we have made so that it becomes easier for you to adapt to it. Secondly, the provisional agenda. The agendas that you are dealing with in the committees are the exact UN agendas that we are dealing with at this moment. So we do not have any agenda that has been created by us. Let's say, for example, something to do with cyber crimes in DISEC. Well, DISEC does not deal with cyber crimes at this moment at the UN. So we have ensured that we have not come up with agendas which we have created, and these all agendas that we are going to discuss form part of the UN list of provisional agendas. At the same time, the conduct of business in the general course of the conference is very much aligned to that of the United Nations. All right, so research recap for people who were present, were not present. We can always benefit from what we have learned yesterday. Going through it once again, when you get your country allocation, committee allocation, the first thing that we need to do is try and get hold of our country's national portal. Read about your country from your country's official website. Try and understand where your country exists, what is the type of government, what is the type of cultural diversity or population structure, demographics of your country. And from there on, you would direct yourself to the official website of your country's ministry, which deals with foreign affairs or external affairs. Now, this ministry will help you to identify your country's foreign policy. Foreign policy is an important aspect in a Model UN conference, and at every instance, you are faced with challenges and issues that surround your country's foreign policy. If you are to talk to another delegate of another country in a particular manner regarding your country's policies, it is governed by your foreign policy. So if you extend a hand of friendship and cooperation to another country, you are doing so in an MUN because your foreign policy asks you to do so. If you are not doing it, then also your foreign policy is responsible for it, and you need to understand what is your country's foreign policy. It's not one set of documents. You have to go through many number of speeches and statements that have been given by the diplomats of your country, which you would find through the Ministry of External Affairs website. Find those statements which concern your agenda or anything to do with the keywords of your agenda. And accordingly, you can try and identify what your country's position is with regard to your agenda. Next, we would proceed to the permanent mission of your country to the United Nations. When you Google search permanent mission of Vanuatu, for example, Vanuatu is a country. So permanent mission of Vanuatu to the United Nations, you will find the embassy of this country to the UN. Embassy is a layman term for a permanent mission that I'm using at this moment. It's not actually an embassy, but it's very close to an ambassadorial presence at the United Nations. All right? So the permanent mission of your country to the UN is basically an office of your country's ambassadors who have been sent to the United Nations because your country is a member of the UN. And this website will give you details as to the press statements or releases or any kind of other documents that the permanent mission has released in favor of your country. Try and identify those documents which relate to your agenda, and you'll be able to understand more on your foreign policy. Next, we would proceed to the UN website, un.org. This website will have a search box to the right-hand side. You can type in the name of your committee on the search box and try and get hold of your committee website. Or you can type in your agenda, and the search results will give you the documents, statements, related materials that concern your agenda. Next, very important thing that I did not cover yesterday was this website which deals with member states on the record. Now, you can just Google search this term, member states on the record at the UN, and you would find probably the first link is the link to this UN website. Member states on the record is a UN web page that documents all the statements, speeches, and any kind of official releases that your country has made at the United Nations. So since India is a member of the UN right from 1947, as soon as we gained independence, and we were also participating in the UN conference in 1945, so right from 1945 till now, all the statements made by India are present on this website, which is Member States on the Record. So what you do is, when you go to Member States on the Record, you will find an index from A to Z. Go for the letter which is the initial of your country, and there you would find your country's name mentioned. Go to that link, and that link will give you the statements made by your ambassadors or your diplomats in various committees of the UN. Go for the committee that concerns you, and try and find if there is any particular statement made concerned to your agenda. All right? The UN website can also give you results which end up in documents and resolutions of the committee. These documents also include the reports on the agenda. So reading the resolutions and reports on the agenda can give you a fair idea as to the progress of the UN's work with respect to this topic. And at the same time, it can help you formulate and understand your policy with regard to this agenda. Countries which are neutral in nature do not have any particular say on the topic. You can always try and find out if there are any allies of your country whom you would want to follow or whom your country will allow you to follow, and try and see if their policies are available, and you can always learn from them. Or you can find the best practices available on your topic and create a common ground where you can suggest to the other delegates that these are the model methods or model practices that we can take up, and this is how we can resolve this particular issue. Is that clear? Any concern till now? Any question? Please raise your hand straight up if you have any query. All right, proceeding ahead. Now, once you gather material for your research, the thing that you do is you prepare your opening statement. Opening statement is your first speech that you are going to give at the committee or in the committee once the session starts. This speech would require you to cover the following: a general greeting to your committee, which would read something like, Honorable Chair, Honorable Secretary, members, or member state representatives, something like this. Very basic. And then start with the general overview of the topic. General overview meaning give a brief description as to what the topic is and how it concerns your country, followed by which you can always highlight the progress made by the United Nations relating to this topic that you're going to discuss. Thirdly, the involvement of your country with regard to this agenda. And lastly, if there are any proposals that you bring to table for discussion today or on the day of the committee, then you can also highlight that in your opening speech. The general protocol is that once a member state has spoken on the general speakers list, the country may not speak again. But if there are no other countries who are participating in the general speakers list as an original member, then you can always enroll yourself on the general speakers list once again. But when you take your dais, you have to apologize to the committee once for taking a second turn to speak. I'll cover this in greater detail when we are dealing with the rules of procedure. May I proceed to the next slide, or are we noting down? All right, thank you. So from here, let's start with the UN for MUN procedure. Don't worry, I have not tried anything that is so fancy, writing a 4. It is precisely what the UN has done. It's the UN's way of mentioning their procedure, UN for MUN. So probably they're trying to strike a balance with the youth. But okay, so let's start with a basic concept called the committee time. When we come into the committee, or when we start the conference, or when we start any meeting for that matter, be it the UN or even your classroom, there's a set allocated time in any formal setting. Do we agree with that? Right? So you need to abide by the committee's time. If your teacher starts giving you, or with a regular lecture, you would always expect that lecture to end at a particular time, and you would always expect that that time has been utilized fruitfully. Same way, we have a time allocation for our committee that basically starts on day 1 when you enter the committee, and it ends on day 2 or day 3, depending on which committee you are in, on the final day when the committee ends and we start with the closing ceremony, right? So it is basically the total time of the committee that we have, right from the commencement of the session to the end of the session. Now, the Bureau handles the allocation and management of time within the committee. So who is the Bureau? The chair and the secretary. These are two people who would be present in your committee to guide you with your discussions. And these are the people who are responsible for your time management and how the discussions take place in your committee. All right? Shall I proceed? Okay. Please, go on. So, generally the function of the Bureau includes that they allocate time to the member states to speak in the committee and to allocate time of the committee for any purposes that we are required to. So if we need to discuss a particular topic, the Bureau's permission is required in order to allocate time to start discussion on that topic. So the Bureau members do play an important role in the functioning of the committee, and we would be dealing in a greater detail as to the roles of the Bureau members in the slides to come. Shall I? Thank you. So the committee or the council structure that we have over here, most importantly, the member state delegates, you would be participating as delegates of different countries. You are the most important component of your committee. Just imagine a committee where no delegate turns up. You think that a Bureau can function on their own? 2 people? Not at all possible. So you are the most important element of your committee. Without your participation, the committee cannot go ahead. Then comes the conference official, whom we call the Bureau. All right? Now, how things happen at the UN, let me give you a brief example. The Bureau members are nothing but people who have been elected from within you. The process that we follow in an MUN conference is slightly different. We bring in applications for people who would want to become Bureau members, go through a rigorous process of application and interview, and then we select them. But at the UN, everyone is equal. And people who do not have any experience in diplomacy, probably are even coming to the United Nations for the first time, even they can become bureau members depending on the election that takes place. So let's say this is one big committee. Before the committee starts its session, you all would put through a secret ballot system the name of the country whom you want to chair this session. So there are, let's say, 4 or 5 countries who have nominated themselves to become the chair. And out of those 4 countries, you would be selecting one and putting your vote in the ballot box. That's how the UN functions. And then the chairperson of that session is elected. This is done approximately like a good 2 to 3 months before the conference starts. So, but in this procedure, we already have our bureau pre-selected through the process, and you would be participating as delegates. But at the same time, the people who are going to chair the conference will also have a country allocated to them. So whenever during the course of the conference they are not participating as bureau members, they will be participating with you in the discussions of the committee. All right? How many of us have done MUN conferences before? Okay, and people who have done MUN conferences outside the UN for MUN procedure, like Harvard or Taiwan or something like that. All right, so this might be new to you, that certain things are changing, and it's a process of unlearning for you. So do note that the bureau members will also have a country allocated to them, and they will equally participate in the discussion along with the delegates. All right? So the chair or the president, why these 2 combinations have been mentioned? Because the committees have chairpersons, the commissions also have chairpersons, but the councils have presidents. Okay, so that is the organizational structure within a committee, commission, or a council. Now, what does a chair or president do? The chair gives the floor to the delegates. What is the floor? The opportunity to speak, the opportunity to address the committee. This is moderated by the chairperson. The chairperson also moderates the direction of the discussion, and the chairperson helps the committee to reach consensus. So it's not merely that the chairperson would be sitting there and giving opportunity to speak, but the chairperson will also participate in the discussion to ensure that the committee comes to a close consensus on a particular problem. Reason being that you are faced with an agenda which is basically a problem, right? The agendas come on the UN's list only when the UN needs to take action on them. So the chair needs to help the committee to reach consensus. At the same time, there would be another personality sitting on the bureau along with the chair or the president. He or she is known as the secretary. The secretary is basically an administrative official of the UN. The secretary does not represent any country. All right? The work of the secretary is to assist the committee with the procedure of the conference, and at the same time address the concern of the delegates which deal with the agenda. So if you have any queries or concerns with regard to your committee's agenda or with respect to the procedure of the conference, the person whom you should approach in the committee would be the secretary of the committee. Is that clear? Do we have any queries regarding that? Okay. So a typical United Nations committee looks somewhat like this. We have the bureau members taking the dais. There's something called the podium. This kind of a setup may or may not be in the classrooms at the moment, but this would be, we will try to make available a podium for you in the conference setting from where you would be addressing the other members of your committee. And those rectangular boxes that you see, those are the delegates. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at creatives. So yeah, those are you. Relate to yourselves. So those are the delegates present in the committee, and that's how the setup is going to look like. Any questions? All right. So a main concern that we face is how do we address other members? So this entire process is very new to us. Diplomacy or a formal, having a session in a formal setup is new, and therefore we would start to understand how do we address other members. Now, most importantly, I have noticed in MUN conferences that delegates treat the conference officials, or not conference officials exactly, the secretariat members, the ones who form the part of the organization, in a very rude fashion. They think that they are there to serve them. Of course, they are there to serve you, but at the same time, you need to treat them with a great degree of respect, because they are the ones who are setting up the entire event, and they are the organization who is letting you, or who is giving this platform to you. So the most important aspect is, how do you treat members of the secretariat who will be present? Can you identify members of the secretariat present over here? Right now? The people who have been helping you throughout to enter, have your seat, to make yourselves organized and arranged in this setup, right? Are members of secretariat? Raise your hands. All right, so they're part of our organizing team, and these are the people, along with approximately 60 to 70 of other students, who would be helping you out throughout the conference. Addressing them would involve you to address them as Honorable Madam or Honorable Sir. All right? At any and all times, you're supposed to address the secretariat members as Honorable Madam or Honorable Sir. Now, how do you address your other co-participants or delegates? Honorable Delegate of, name of the country. Vanuatu, I've taken that as a uniform example for throughout today's session. So let's say Honorable Delegate of India, Honorable Delegate of United States, Honorable Delegate of Burkina Faso. So anything of that nature. Okay? So this inculcates a degree, a great degree of diplomatic respect when you're addressing the other person, and this needs to be maintained throughout your conference. The committee head or the members of the bureau, how do you address them? Honorable Chair or Honorable President or Honorable Secretary. Is that clear? And the Secretary General of the conference is normally addressed as the Honorable Secretary General. Do we have any concerns or queries respect to this? All right. Shall I proceed? At any point in time, you think I should not proceed, just raise your hand. We can wait on the slide for a longer time. All right. Generally, what we have observed is that in conferences, people either end up taking names of others or like try to communicate through languages like sign languages, hey. But no, you're dealing with, you are diplomats of countries and you need to treat the other person in the same manner. Until unless we create that professional, formal setup, the discussions will not proceed in the direction that we want it to. Shall I? Thank you. Okay, so roll call. The moment you enter the committee, you are seated in your committee. The bureau members come and start presiding on your committee. At that time, the first thing that is done in the committee is the names of the delegates, or the country names of the delegates, are called out in an alphabetical order. So roll call is a very common practice that happens at each and every setting which requires your participation. This is not a new concept to you. In your classrooms also, you start your day with the roll call. And the same manner, the UN also functions starting with the roll call. Now, how do you address the roll call? So when your country's name has been called, all right, so Honorable Delegate of Pakistan. Any delegate of Pakistan out here? All right, so Honorable Delegate of Pakistan. How would you respond? Could we have the mic passed to the sir, please?
Secretariat of Pakistan.
Yes, Honorable Delegate of Pakistan. So when we are asking you to give a roll call, in your classroom, when you are asked to give your roll call, how do you respond to your teacher?
By our roll number.
By your roll number, right? So in the same manner, we have another setting over here at the UN in which you have to present your roll call either as present or present and voting, all right? So let's try with that. Honorable Delegate of Pakistan.
Present.
Present, all right, perfect. Please have your seat. So now this is how it proceeds. The chairperson calls the name of the country and the delegate responds by saying present or present and voting. Now what does this mean? Or why should you say present, or why should you say present and voting? There's an important concept. This is not merely a procedural aspect or a formality. It involves your country's foreign policy right out here at the beginning of the conference. How? Let's see. When you give your roll call as present in a committee, then when we are discussing resolutions at the end of the conference, you can either vote in favor of that resolution, you can vote against the resolution, or you can stay outside the voting process by abstaining. What does abstain mean? I do not vote. So it's neither a yes nor a no. Okay? And the other option is present and voting. This adds an obligation or a responsibility on you to vote either in favor or against. You can't stay out of the voting process. Is that clear? So in which case, if you are giving your roll call as present and voting in the beginning of the conference, when we are discussing resolution towards the end, you have the option to either vote in favor or against. Now, how does this reflect your country's foreign policy? Any idea? Yes, sir. Could we have the microphone, please?
If your committees, like past roll calls were present and voting, and if in this conference you say it's like the delegate of Pakistan's present, then it would affect the foreign policy of a country, because in the past UN conference, your committees roll calls present and voting.
Right. Close. Anything or anybody who can add to this? Yes, ma'am? Madam in purple.
If your country is neutral to any of the subject, then you cannot just vote. You have to abstain from voting at that particular time.
Did you participate in Pune Union before?
No.
Good. So, yes, this is precisely the reason two of these answers combine together. How? So, it all depends on the agenda that you're dealing with. Okay? So, I take a very common example, India's position when it comes to the Arab-Palestine issue, or the Israel-Palestine issue, right? So, what happens is, India has always maintained a policy which is neither completely in favor of Israel nor completely in favor of the state of Palestine. Why? Because it keeps differing from situation to situation. So if there are gross human rights violations taking place, then India will not support that country blindly, or not support that state blindly. Okay? So what India does is that in such a contentious matter, it keeps its roll call as present, so that towards the end, if the resolution portrays something which is in favor of a country which is, towards, or which has done acts not favorable to the foreign policy of India, then India can always abstain from the voting by not taking any side. In which case, you are not making an enemy out of Israel, you are not making an enemy out of the potential state of Palestine or its allies. All right? Take an example where your country has a very strong opinion on a particular topic. So, how about we consider Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is, in common layman terms, North Korea. All right? So, Democratic People's Republic of Korea has a very strong policy which it has set towards nuclear disarmament. The DPRK wants nuclear proliferation to happen in certain countries because its opinion is that there should be like equal military strength or equal opportunity to develop military strength to all countries. That is the position that DPRK has been maintaining at the international forum. So if a resolution is in favor of nuclear disarmament, DPRK is always going to vote no. Nuclear disarmament is basically disarming or not in favor of nuclear weapons, right? So in such a situation, DPRK will always vote against that resolution. And if there is a resolution which comes up which says that nuclear disarmament is not that great an idea, then of course DPRK is going to vote in favor of that resolution. there is no situation in which this country will have a gray area in its policy. So when you have researched your foreign policy very well, and you know that your country is going to be either in favor or against, then it is always advisable to go for present in voting. But if there is a situation where your country may side with one bloc or may not side with it, then in that case it's favorable for you to go for present, in which case when the resolution comes up, you can stay out of the voting process without making any diplomatic fallacies towards the end. Okay? So a common question that we receive is that why should then anybody opt for present in voting? Just to be on the safer side, we can all take present, and we can have the option to abstain at the end of it. Now, in this setup of a Model UN conference, unfortunately, delegates are adjudged for their performance in the committee. I'm staunchly against the concept of marking delegates and giving them awards. Probably from the next conference onwards, we are going to take out the process of awards altogether to make the event more friendly to the purpose of it, and nothing to do with a competition or competitive spirit out here. So solely for the purpose of learning international relations and diplomacy, we might have a conference. But when we are talking about an event where you are being adjudicated, foreign policy is one of the first things that we look at. And if we know, we as in the chairperson knows that your country has a strong policy on this matter, and still you're going for a weaker roll call which is present, then in that case, that reflects badly on your research. Is that clear? So it reflects on your research. If you have done your research properly and given your roll call in the appropriate manner, then in that case, it shows good on your part. Now, how do you know that your country has voted either in favor or against a particular resolution? When you're conducting your research, when you read a resolution online on the UN website, it is always accompanied along with the voting records. So you will find number of states who have voted yes, all their names mentioned. Number of states who have mentioned no, their names have been mentioned. Abstention list is also mentioned over there. Okay? So we need you to go through that list as well to understand how you can give your roll call right in the beginning. Any queries or concerns? Questions? Okay, shall I proceed? All right. So next thing that we deal with is the provisional agenda. The agenda that you have already received for your committee, that is known as the provisional agenda for the UN. Why is it called provisional? Provisional means temporary, or it could probably change in the course of time. It doesn't. But then why is it called provisional? Any queries or concerns, or any ideas that you can come up with for this? Any explanation? Okay, so basically why it is called a provisional agenda. The UN at any point in time may decide to change its set of agenda. This power has been given to the Secretary General and at the same time the President of the General Assembly in consultation with the Secretary General. So that's why the UN never mentions that this is the agenda or set agenda for the committee until and unless the agenda has been adopted by the committee. So the agenda that has been provided to you is still temporary. Okay, I assure you that it will not change, but when you come for the conference, the first thing that you would need to do is you would need to adopt the agenda. All right? So that brings us to the next point, which is adoption of agenda. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering what kind of situation in the UN would actually call for suddenly changing the agenda?
Thank you. This change of agenda is not a very sudden process. Approximately 2 weeks of time is provided for General Assembly committees to intimate them regarding the change of agenda. Situations where this could happen is when the Security Council might suggest to the General Assembly that so-and-so agenda be taken on a priority. And for that reason, the General Assembly might need to change the set of its agenda. Okay? So let's say there is an emergency situation where there is an outbreak of Ebola, for example, these situations. And the Security Council, though it can take decision, it would still appreciate if the General Assembly conducts an immediate meeting and discusses the same. So what happens is the General Assembly can suspend one of its agenda and take Ebola as a priority, deal with it, and then go with the next agenda. So that's how, or those are the situations where probably the agenda could be changed, right? Now, adoption of agenda does not happen through a motion. It's basically a declaration made by the chair or the president of the General Assembly that I understand that so-and-so agenda of the committee is set to be adopted. Do delegates have any objections to this? So if there are no objections, then in that case, the agenda is considered to be adopted. This is a matter of mere formality, and it will be done by the chair of your committee. So if you have any objection to the agenda, you can probably raise your placard and object to it for whatever reasons you might have. You can very well have objection to a particular agenda if your country requires you to. So, okay, let's consider the situation where, yes ma'am, sorry.
So since the Security Council, you have 2 agendas. So does that come in here? Like you decide which agenda are you going to discuss?
Thank you. Now, in Security Council, at this moment, we have 2 agenda that has been suggested as provisional agenda. So what the Security Council members would do is the chairperson would invite the delegates to set the agenda or to adopt the agenda. By default, the agenda stands as first topic as Ebola, or the agenda that concerns Ebola. And the second topic deals with the situation in Iraq. So the chairperson or the president would go in this manner. Honorable delegates, we understand that the agenda that has been provided to you is now set to be adopted. Are there any objections to it? So if delegates want to change the set of the agenda, then they can raise an objection and suggest that, Honorable Chairperson, the set of agendas need to change in such a manner that the situation in Iraq needs to be discussed first, followed by the agenda concerning Ebola, and these are the reasons why the delegate of Iraq or delegate of India suggests that the order of the agenda should change. Okay? And if a person is saying or if requesting to change the order of the agenda, then the chairperson is well within his or her powers to request another person to give an opinion against this point. So if there is another delegate who suggests that the order of the agenda should not be changed, then that is also heard, and then this matter is put to vote. Now, when these type of motions are being voted, these are called procedural matters. This does not have an effect on the main resolution that you're going to draft. So it's a procedural resolution or a procedural vote that we are going to take, and in such a vote, all countries have to vote either in favor or against. You can't say that, well, I'm not sure if I want this motion to go ahead or not. So you have to vote either in favor or you have to vote against. You can't abstain, irrespective of what your roll call is. All right? So are we clear on this point? Okay. So formal adoption of the conference agenda by delegates takes place at the beginning of the opening plenary. So all the General Assembly committees, note that your agenda would be adopted right in the beginning on 16th itself. And the other commissions that we have, your agenda would be adopted on the next day when we start with the first day of our conference. Any questions regarding adoption of agenda? Yes, ma'am.
Can only the order of the agenda can be changed, or the whole agenda in itself can be changed if required?
Thank you, ma'am. Only the order of the agenda can be changed. As such, the agenda cannot be restructured or rephrased. So only its order as to first or second can be changed, because the phrasing of the agenda is done by the Secretariat, which cannot change until the next conference or until the next session of the General Assembly. So the only power that the committee has is to change its order. And this is applicable only in case of the Security Council for this conference. Why? Because the other committees have only one agenda. You don't have any choice. Okay. Any questions? Moving forward. A minute of silence. Now, this is a compulsory procedure at the United Nations, because the UN recognizes that at every point in time during the functioning of the states, something or the other is going wrong in the world. So things which should not happen are still happening, and there are regular condolence meetings that the UN cannot hold. So a minute of silence is normally like conducted, or you could say the chair calls for it or invites for it right at the beginning of the conference, and this is also a procedural formality that needs to be complied with. So immediately following the opening plenary, the General Assembly President calls or invites all delegates to observe a minute of silence. Any questions regarding this? Seeing none, I proceed to quorum. How many of us understands what quorum is? Okay, many. So could we have you to describe what the quorum could be, or what is the quorum? Yes, ma'am. We would request you to address in the microphone.
The minimum number of members required before the meeting should start.
Minimum number of members required before the meeting should start. Okay, perfect. Why is the quorum required? Any logical thought? It's a very logical answer to it. All right, could we have... Yes, ma'am, please.
So that there's proper representation.
So that there is proper representation in the committee before anything can be discussed or taken action on. What we are dealing with are major concerns of the world. And if there is no sufficient representation in the committee, do you think that would be a fair decision that is taken by the committee? No. Therefore, quorum is required, and at the UN, the President of the General Assembly or the chairperson declares the quorum right in the beginning of the meeting. Now, for the plenary session, the quorum stands at 1/3 of the total strength of the committee, or total strength of the General Assembly. So let's say in the plenary session, we have approximately 65 countries participating, or 70 countries participating. 1/3 of that is declared to be the quorum. So if at any point in time the plenary session sees an adjournment, when you reconvene, at least 1/3 of the initial number should be present so that the discussion can start. All right? At the same time, when you're dealing with other committees or commissions or the councils, 1/4 member is a must for any decision or any action to be taken or any discussion to start, right? So in case your committee has 40 members who are present, then out of the 40, 10 members have to be present during the next session for the discussion to start. Is that clear? This number will be declared right in the beginning once the roll call is done, once the agenda is adopted, minute of silence is observed, then the quorum is declared by the President of the General Assembly or the chair of the committee. Is that clear? Any questions? Now, your speeches. So President of the General Assembly or the chairperson calls on the speakers in the order in which they signified their desire to speak. Now, this process happens at the United Nations much earlier to the conference. But since over here we do not have such a mechanism to request you to send in the order of preference for your speeches, in the beginning, the General Assembly President or the chairperson will ask delegates to raise their placard. Okay, what's a placard? It's basically a nameplate of your country. You will have it in a cardboard paper form. You will raise your placard if you wish to speak. And the General Assembly President or the chairperson will note down the list of countries which are going to speak. Is that clear? No delegate shall address the committee unless and until the podium or the floor has been given to you by the chair or the bureau member. Is that clear? What does this mean? Basic discipline needs to be observed. We cannot randomly speak in the committee. We need to wait for our turn, which would be given to us by the person who has the power to do so. And that person is the chair of the committee or the President of the General Assembly. Is that clear? All right. Any questions regarding speeches? Yes, sir.
We are allowed to read our speeches, right? Like,
You are allowed to read your speeches, absolutely.
okay.
There is no requirement for you to learn
Are these
by heart
speeches
or-
different from the opening speeches that we're supposed to?
No, these are any and all kind of speeches. Moment you address the committee, it's considered to be a speech. So this includes at any point in time, if you're speaking in the committee, it would be considered as a speech. Yes, madam over here, followed by towards the end.
What is the time limit for our speeches?
We would be dealing with time limit in the slides to come. Thank you.
I wanted to ask something about the quorum. In event of not securing 1/4 of the members, will the committee or the agenda for discussion be adjourned or something?
The agenda itself will not be adjourned or will not be considered as tabled. Tabling the agenda means we do not do anything further about it. What we do is, if there is no quorum, then the committee time or the convening time is postponed to, let's say, 15 minutes later or half an hour later. But we have to wait till the quorum is achieved. Okay, now one thing is that you might consider that, let's say, if there is no quorum, then the committee can't start. So let us all just not appear. So if lunch is till 2, let's just commonly decide that we won't enter the committee till 2:10. Anyway, if there is no quorum, then we can't start. But really, we would appreciate that it does not look good on your side. At the same time, we just have 2 days for this conference, and the agenda requires your attention. So please do adhere to the time restrictions placed by your chairperson. Any other question? Yes, ma'am.
How many times a country speaker can deliver the speech? Is he allowed a particular speaker?
Thank you. As per the procedure, it's only once, but this is just a procedural requirement that a delegate can speak in the committee only once. But again, if no other delegate is addressing the committee, you can put in your name or you can request to address the committee again. All that you would need to do is issue a statement of apology right in the beginning that the honorable delegate of, what's your country?
Somalia.
Somalia. The honorable delegate of Somalia apologizes to have taken a second opportunity on the podium, but this is pressing for the reasons as follows. And then you state what you need to. All right? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Speeches are only to do with you coming on the podium and speaking, right? Or generally just addressing this chair at all?
Actually, addressing the chair at all does not happen in this particular setup or procedure. The only time that you even address the chair is while you are speaking, and the other time is when you're raising a point or a motion. That is it. So those are not considered as speeches. Speeches are basically when you're addressing the chair and the committee at large. Yes, ma'am.
Now, suppose if I have one point, as a delegate of my country, I have a point, and other country's delegate is going against my point. So, do I have the right to speak again, or then I'll have to wait for everyone to not speak and then speak come up with my point?
All right, thank you. So, faced with a contentious situation where one delegate has laid some serious accusations or allegations against your country, as much as we would like to respond to it immediately in the general course of life, at the UN, protocol demands us to follow the order in which we are recognized. So next time when you get an opportunity to speak, you may address that concern of the delegate. But we may not, or we do not provide the opportunity to give, speak or address that concern in the immediate instance. Okay? Yes, sir. One second, we would wait for the microphone to arrive. There you are.
Suppose the delegate of other country asks a question to the other delegate. Can some other delegate answer the question?
Okay, thank you. Now, in the general course, we would not find one country asking a question to another country at the UN. the speeches that are made by UN diplomats are statements which show their opinion. So we would really not come across a situation where one delegate will put a question to other delegate. They might put you in a situation where you would want to respond in order to make your country's policies sound right. But yes, another country can always take care of that situation as well. So let's consider a situation which has taken place in the history, or we have come across such a situation. It was in 1955, Security Council issue concerning Kashmir. The Indian delegate at that time, V.R. Krishna Menon, addressed the UN Security Council for 8 hours 50 minutes approximately. Yeah, why? Because on that day, the Russian delegate was not present to save India's vote. You need one country to vote against for a Security Council resolution to fail. It's called the veto power, a negative vote in order to fail the resolution. So if a permanent member in the Security Council votes against a resolution, then that resolution is considered as vetoed. Vetoed meaning it can't be considered as adopted, it fails. So the Russian delegate did not come, and the other permanent members were in favor of the resolution, which was not in favor of India. So India had to wait for Russia to come in order to save that resolution, to give that negative vote. So the Indian delegate spoke for almost 8.5 hours till next day. So the entire committee session got over. The Indian delegate even fainted. Mr. Menon even fainted at the UN. And next day, he again continued his speech for a good 2.5 hours. And finally, the Russian delegate arrived and made a statement which was in favor of India. And then said only one thing. This statement was very short and crisp, followed by only one thing, that we would vote against this resolution. So 8.5 hours of a non-permanent member speech against another person who is a permanent member, just coming in, giving in a very fine statement concerning the topic and suggesting that they would vote against the resolution. So yes, of course, you can take care or address the concern of a country against another country which does not have anything to do with you. And why would you do something like that? Because your country's foreign policy might want you to do so. If at that point in time you are not coming into the aid or support of that country, then it also does not look good. So in a situation where, let's say, Israel is literally facing the brunt of the entire committee, that the entire committee has kind of gone against Israel in suggesting that what they are doing is absolutely wrong, and the delegate of United States of America does not intervene in the discussion and keeps quiet, there you're violating your foreign policy, because US and Israel are very strong partners in international relations. And if Israel is facing the brunt of something, it is observed primarily that USA comes to its defense. So you can always do that. Just make sure that your foreign policy allows you to do so. Any other question? Yes, ma'am.
When it's your turn to speak, do you only have to give a speech, or can you assist it with a PowerPoint presentation consisting of graphs?
As much as it would be interesting, the UN sadly does not have a provision for making a PowerPoint presentation unless and until it could be considered as an informal meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So yes, if you have a PowerPoint presentation that you would want to make to the committee, you can always make and bring it. You can request the chairperson that I would like to address the committee in so and so manner, and an informal session could be allocated where you address the committee in that capacity. But during a general speakers list position, that when you're coming and addressing the committee regularly, you may not make any kind of audiovisual presentation except for your own speech.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Right in the end.
If your turn for speech has over and you want to add another point for it, so you have to wait till no one is answering, or you can get another opportunity for that.
I'm repeating your question, just correct me if I'm wrong, that if you miss out a point that you need to make in your speech and you would want to include that point, then how you would go about it?
Yes.
Right? So do you wait until your turn comes in again, or do you make it in the middle of it?
Yes.
Right? You have to wait until your turn comes in again and you get an opportunity to address the committee once again. the committee session could not be interrupted if another delegate is addressing. Any other question? Yes, sir?
So, how do you
We're sorry about that.
end your speech once you're done talking? How do you end your speech? And if you want somebody to help you at the end, then how do you like reference to them and ask them whether they can talk at the end and help you out?
All right. So, in the conferences till now, we had a procedure called yielding. That there would be something like yielding to another delegate, or yielding to question, or yielding to a comment for that matter. But from this conference onwards, we are striking down this concept of yields. So there would be no yields. You end your speech by suggesting that in whatever way you would want to end a regular speech, that we thank the Honorable Chairperson for giving the Delegate of India to present at this forum, and that would be it. Okay, so in a regular fashion, in some conferences you are required to give a yield to another delegate, or you have to yield the time back to the chair. But that process has been struck down by the UN. It was never a part of the UN, honestly. So UN has suggested that let's not go with yields and complicate the procedure. Regularly, how you would end a speech, just end it, say thank you, that's where it ends. Okay? So just giving you a brief example, in the previous conferences, we had this concept of yield wherein once you complete your speech, you're supposed to yield your time, as in give your time back to the chairperson or back to the bureau. Or you could yield it to another delegate so that they can come and state a point on your behalf. But those are processes and procedures which are not part of the UN, and therefore when you end your speech, all that you say is thank you and go back to your seat. Any question? Yes, ma'am?
You talked about intervening when someone speaks about an ally, against an ally of yours. How do you go about intervening? I mean, you have to wait till your turn, or but in between, and when you're talking, you just bring up another country, your ally, or how do you go about the whole thing?
All right. So if you observe a situation where one of your allies, or probably your own country, is being spoken in a bad light, or in a bad light with respect to policy, of course. So then in that case, you can enroll yourself on the speaking list. You can make your point available to the chair. You can write to the chairperson. You'll be provided with diplomatic chits that you can write on, saying to the chairperson, from Delegate of India. You can let them know that you would like to speak, and they will put your name down, or your country's name down, on the speakers list. The next time when you get an opportunity to speak, you can address that concern. Any direct intervention or interruption is not allowed. And even if you hear something which is not in favor of you, you may not directly raise your placard and say, like, what's happening types. Not at all. You have to wait until the chairperson calls for speakers on the speakers list, and then you can enroll your name on it. All right? Yes, sir.
Last time we had an option of yielding our time for questions as well, if I'm not wrong. What about this time? Are we allowed to do the same? Like if we want people to ask us any queries about the matter we've spoken about?
Thank you. This time, there are no yields whatsoever, not even questions. So all these processes, the point of cutting down on these procedures is that we want you to focus more on informal discussions. These are formal discussions, or what we call as formal mode of debate. And UN functions primarily, the decisions that are taken in the UN happens outside the formal setup. So there are informal meetings and sessions wherein the main diplomacy happens. Literally, it's a playfield for diplomacy. And that is something that we want you to experience in the informal sessions which we would be dealing with. Any other query regarding speeches? Yes, ma'am.
So like in the speeches, we're supposed to talk about our policy on the particular agenda.
Right.
So attack other countries' policies, like directly mentioning their name and then attacking their policy on the particular agenda.
Thank you. This also again depends on, does your country do something like this at the UN? So if you are, let's say again, North Korea or DPRK, and you have to address a concern that deals with USA, then yes, we have seen in instances in the past where these countries have referred to each other directly and expressed their concern that such a nuclear development or such a militaristic development is a concern for the world, and we would really appreciate that if this country stops or ceases to do it immediately. So something like that is allowed, but it would not be generally in your favor to outrightly go against a country just for the sake of doing it or for the fun of it, because honestly that's not how it proceeds. So you need to read up on whether your country has done something like this in the past, and would it be within your mandate and power to represent your country in this manner. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
As you said that we'll get one chance and the conference will last for 2 days. So then we'll get one chance for one day, like if today is the conference, so we'll get one chance today and one chance tomorrow, or else we'll get only one chance for both the 2 days.
Thank you. It's a very, very valid concern that the rule book says that only one chance can be given. And a second chance can be given only when nobody else, who has not spoken before needs to speak. Okay? So if one person keeps talking continuously in a committee and there are other members who also wish to speak, then in that case if the chair keeps recognizing that same person again, then the other people who would like to address the committee do not get the opportunity to do so. So that is why the rule book says that only one chance will be given. But honestly, in an MUN conference, you would get more than one chance definitely. All that you need to do is, when you come to the podium and address for the second time or the third time, fourth time, consecutive times, you have to issue a small statement of apology suggesting that you need to or you had to take another chance at your speech, and these are the reasons for it. Okay? But it wouldn't be one day, one chance on this day and one chance on the other day. You would get multiple chances on both the days. So don't worry about that. Any other questions? Yes, sir. One second. We would wait for the microphone.
What if everyone has finished speaking? Do we still need to apologize, or?
If everyone has finished speaking, the protocol still requires you to apologize. So see, there is no written code mentioned for this, but there's a general custom that has been established at the UN, and we need to follow that. So an apology would still be in order. Any other queries? Yes, sir.
So suppose one delegate has mentioned our country's name in their speech, and if we get a second chance, can we address that country? Like, suppose this country said this about our country, so can we counter it?
Of course you can. What you do with your speaking time is absolutely to your discretion. Just make sure what you're doing is in line with your country's policy. So if a delegate has said certain things which is not in favor of your country, or let's say even in support of your country, and you want to address them again in your speech, you're free to do so. Just make sure that this is supported by your country in the past. Yes, ma'am.
If we want to direct the discussion in a certain direction, or say something like, I believe, like the delegate believes that the committee should talk about this particular aspect of the agenda, can we include that in our speech, or?
Of course. So if you want the committee's attention to go towards a particular subtopic or another agenda, not agenda per se, but let's say a small sub-agenda within your main big agenda that you have, then you may always request the committee to start discussing on such a topic. How the committee discusses such a topic is again through these turns that you get on the general speakers list. Okay? And through informal discussions. So at times, your committee would break into informal discussions. We would be dealing with that in the procedural setup further. And in those situations, you can talk about some specific sub-agenda that you can urge the committee or the country to talk about. But at the same time, the entire committee should also be willing to discuss something like that. Is your query addressed? All right. Any other question that we have regarding speeches? All right. Seeing none, if you have any other query, we can come back to it towards the end. Point of order. Now, in MUN conferences regularly, there are 3 points. Do not write this down. Point of order, point of parliamentary inquiry, point of personal privilege, etc. But at the United Nations, the only point that exists is the point of order. So yes, you can write that down, that point of order is the only point that exists. Now, what is a point? So, a point is basically to draw the attention of the Bureau on some kind of inaccuracy or procedural mistake that has happened. So a delegate may raise a point of order during the discussion of any matter. The president or chairperson must rule immediately on the point of order. A delegate may appeal the ruling, which must be immediately put to vote. Now, how is a point of order used? If, let's take an example that the chairperson has kept the committee's speaking time to 2 minutes. But you suggest that since this topic is very important, it requires greater attention, that all delegates should be given 3 minutes. So you raise a point of order suggesting that Honorable Chairperson, the delegate of India, feels that 2 minutes would be too short a time to address this concern. Other member states should get opportunity to speak for at least 3 minutes during the procedure, for which we would like you to make a ruling. You don't need to remember these lines. You can always put a point of order in the most respectable form possible. That is it. Okay, you basically make a request to the chairperson to modify something, to alter something in the committee that has taken place in a manner which you think is wrong. Okay? And the chairperson will give his or her decision on that point. So if you have suggested that 2 minutes should be made as 3 minutes, then in that case, the chairperson can give you a decision saying that, all right, considering these aspects, I make the time 3 minutes, or considering these reasons, I decide that we would not change the time, we would keep it to 2 minutes. If you want to appeal this decision again, you can say that I would like to appeal the Honorable Chairperson's decision. And how is the appeal decided? The entire committee votes either in favor of the suggestion that you made or against it. So a point of order may be raised by a delegate during discussion of any matter if he or she feels that the rules of procedure have not been followed properly. So if the rules of procedure require the speaking time to be 3 minutes and the chair has given only 2 minutes, then you can do so. Or you can raise a point of order. Let's say in the speakers list, your country's name comes at position 3, USA comes at position 5. But immediately after second person has spoken, the chairperson inadvertently or by mistake calls USA. Ideally, whose speaking turn is it? Your country, India, let's say. So what you're supposed to do, are you going to let your speaking opportunity go like that? Just because the chair has done so? No. You're going to bring it to the chair's attention that the rules of procedure have not been followed. And you're going to raise a point of order. A point of order may interrupt the chair at any point in time. So you can raise a point of order and suggest that Honorable Chairperson, rules of procedure have been violated in so manner that Honorable Delegate of India was on point 3 and Delegate of USA has been called as on now. So if that could please be modified. So whatever, even if this is a mistake that you want to highlight to the chairperson, please make sure that you make it in a very respectful manner and not in a rude fashion. Okay? So whatever you wish to say during the course of the conference, please gift wrap it with the best words possible so that it does not offend the other country. That's precisely what diplomacy is. You tell the other person that they are not correct without making them feel that. So any concern regarding a point of order? If these rules of procedure that we are orientating you on are violated in the committee, are breached, or they are not followed in the committee, then you can always raise a point of order and tell the chairperson that this particular rule has been violated. Now, how do you know which rule has been violated how? I'm going to send an email to all of you with the list of these rules, along with the number that is associated with them. And you can always suggest to the chairperson that so and so rule has been violated, and we request you to modify it in the appropriate manner. Questions? Yes?
Can a point of order be used to point out factual inaccuracies?
All right. Factual inaccuracy, the word itself does not have procedure anywhere. So it's not a procedural mistake, and therefore it cannot be highlighted. That's the opinion of the country. So even if today a particular delegate suggests that the sun rises in the west, well, that's the opinion of that country. That's the sovereign opinion of that country, and there is very little that we can do about it. But everyone else definitely knows, and all that you need to make sure is during the course of the discussion, make sure that delegates are not influenced by such a factual inaccuracy. You make sure or bring to the attention of other delegates that so and so factual inaccuracy has been made during the speech of that particular delegate, which we would want the committee to take note of. That's all. But there is no point of order that could be made valid for such an inaccuracy.
Say
Yes,
a point
yes,
of
ma'am.
order has been raised by a delegate of USA and a ruling has been passed on that. But after that, can a delegate of another country appeal against that?
Appeal against the decision?
Yeah.
Yes. Such an appeal is also in order. Any other questions regarding point of order? Yes, sir.
If we raise a point of order from 2 minutes to 3 minutes, and and after that we feel no, this is also a short period, from 3 minutes we can raise it to 4 minutes by raising one more point of order.
All right. Now, firstly, do understand that this was just an example. The rules requires the President of the General Assembly to set the time for your speeches. So if the General Assembly President has set the time as 3 minutes, then we stick to 3 minutes no matter what. And if your chairperson has then made it 4 minutes or 2 minutes, then you can always raise a point of order. But again, from what is already correct and what should be followed, it cannot be changed. So if it's not according to our feelings or wishes that probably this is not sufficient and we should change it, that's not how the point of order works. The rule book needs to tell you that this is the allocated time or this is the procedure, and if that has not been followed, only then you can raise the point of order. Is that clear? Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am, followed by sir right in the end.
After, the chair has given its stand on the particular point of order, and the question is put to appeal. So do all the countries have to be in agreement of that, or is like there a certain number of countries that have to agree to it?
It has to be a majority decision. So if you have 50 members in your committee, 25 plus 1, 26 members have to agree to or should support the ruling or should oppose the ruling for it to either be set or negated. Yes, sir.
Can a point of order be raised to speak against a proposal put forward by some country?
No, sir, that cannot be done because that again does not involve anything to do with the procedure of the conference. Yes, any other question? Yes, ma'am.
How do you raise a point of order?
Thank you. Valid query. When you find or when you identify immediately that there is a procedural inaccuracy that has taken place, you raise your placard. The chairperson is bound to recognize you and ask, Honorable Delegate of India, to what point do you rise? You say, the Honorable Delegate of India rises to a point of order. That Honorable Chairperson, this was the procedure that needed to be followed, and this is the inaccuracy that has taken place. We would request the Honorable Chairperson to kindly rule in favor of the procedure that needs to be followed. Or in any other way that you wish to put it, to make the chair understand that yes, there has been a procedural inaccuracy. But this has to be the method of it. The content can change according to the situation. Yes, sir.
What do I have to do if I want to go against another country's proposal? Because you said I cannot raise a point of order, so how do I say something against another country if I have to?
All right. You have to firstly wait for your turn to come on the general speakers list, and you can utilize that time on the general speakers list or the speaking list to suggest that you do not agree to such and such proposition by the country. Or during informal meetings that take place, you can tell the country that Honorable Delegate of so-and-so, we do not agree to these propositions for these reasons. But there is no direct method of immediately stopping a country or addressing their position. or
So
concern.
the general speakers list is the only formal way of communication.
It is the only formal way of communication.
Thank you.
All right. So when you go to the UN website and you find these statements and press releases, etc., forget the press releases, the statements on the website which was member states on the record. These are nothing but your general speakers list speeches made by your delegates. And that is what we require you to read up in order to prepare your own general speakers list speech. Any other question? Seeing none, I shall proceed to the next point that concerns time limit of speeches. So as I have mentioned earlier, that the President of the General Assembly will be setting the time limit for the speeches. It will be declared in the plenary session as to what time limit should be adhered to. It could either be a common time for all committees, or it could differ from committee to committee depending on their agenda and the number of people participating in that committee. Okay? Now, what happens to the countries or commissions which do not take part in the plenary? Because plenary is only for the General Assembly committees. If you are not part of the General Assembly committees, okay, so basically if you're not part of DISEC, ECOFIN, SOCHUM, SPECPOL, or the legal committee, the plenary session is not for you. Okay? So in the plenary session, the time limit for the speeches will be decided for the General Assembly committees only. The other committees or commissions will be informed by their bureau before the start of this session. Is that clear? And this time is again dependent on the strength of your committee and the agenda that you're dealing with. So is that clear? Roughly do have an idea that it could range at least from 2 minutes to 3 minutes at most. All right? But it would not exceed 3 minutes in any case, and it would not be reduced beyond 2 minutes or below 2 minutes under any circumstance. So when you're preparing your speech, please keep a time slot in mind which would fit from 2 to 3 minutes. Okay? Any questions regarding the time limit? Is this addressed sufficiently, ma'am? Thank you. Now, here comes in the important procedure that is apparently Rule 47, that unwritten code that discourages delegates from speaking more than once. However, if this does happen, then it's common practice for delegate to apologize for doing so. Okay? This is just a formal procedural requirement. Shall I proceed to the next slide? Thank you. So, the list of speakers, how is it selected? It can be firstly opened or closed by the president or chairperson without a vote, but with the consent of the delegates. So there is no motion to open the general speakers list. People who don't have an idea about the motion, keep it out of it. The persons who know about such a motion to exist, we do not have something like this in this conference. There is no motion to start the general speakers list. The chairperson or the president decides when the speakers list opens, when the speakers list closes. All right? It is mandatory for the General Assembly President or the chairperson to take the consent of the committee as a matter of procedural requirement. If there are any objections, then the objection can be raised at that time, suggesting that why the speakers list should not be closed, and then it could be probably voted upon if the President of the General Assembly or the chair feels so. Any queries regarding this? All right. Now, what if the general speakers list or the speakers list has closed and you would want to say something in addition to it? President or chairperson may give the right of reply to any member if a speech delivered after the list has been closed makes this desirable. That means that if the procedural general speakers list has closed and you still wish to have an opportunity to speak on or address the committee, you can always request the chairperson or you can request the President of the General Assembly to give you a right of reply. And right of reply happens after the speech is over or after the speakers list ends. So how this works is, the President of General Assembly or the chairperson invites speakers to speak on the general speakers list. Okay? Let's say after a good 1.5 days of discussion, the President of the General Assembly decides that this should be sufficient for our discussion to proceed ahead, or we can start with working on the resolution or something of this nature, then the chair or the president can take a decision to close the speakers list. And now suddenly you realize that fine, the speakers list is closed, nothing can be done, I cannot be accommodated on the speakers list at this moment. What do? I request the chairperson to give me a right of reply. That this is a pressing requirement for me to address the committee. Not just for the sake of addressing the committee. It has to have a very strong reason as to why, after the speakers list is closed, you still want to address the committee. So this again, this right, whether you get it or not, is the discretion of the chair or decision of the president. Is that clear? It has to have a very valid reason for it to be awarded to you. Yes, sir.
Instead of using the right to reply, can I call for an informal session and then speak to the delegates?
You can always convene an informal session at any point in time if you have the majority support of your committee. But this is just a procedural provision for you. If you want to formally address the committee, then a right of reply is in order. How these two things differ is probably you are going to achieve the same end result. In an informal session also, you are going to address all the delegates, but this statement that you make in the informal session does not get recorded at the UN. This is not official. It is not formal in nature. But if a right of reply has been awarded to you by the chair, then in that case, this statement goes on the official record of the UN and it is considered to be a part of your foreign policy. This is the procedural difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any concerns regarding the right of reply? Yes, ma'am? Okay, we would come back to you after this query.
How do we go about the right to reply? Do we give it in writing to the chairperson, or can we raise our placards for it?
Thank you. The right of reply has to go in writing. It has to be a formal statement, not a page that you just half tear from your notebook and write on it. We would be providing you with full A4 size sheet or likewise material on which you can write a formal statement to the chairperson suggesting that the delegate of so-and-so country would like to address the committee via a right of reply. These are the reasons why I'm requesting so. It may please be awarded to me. And that is how you go ahead with the right of reply request. Yes, ma'am. Right over there.
The president does not conduct a voting session and just takes the consent of the delegates. So how is the consent given? Does he just announce and the delegates nod, or what is it?
All right. So in the same manner as probably I had demonstrated earlier, that consider I'm the president of the General Assembly. Honorable delegates, I understand that sufficient discussion has taken place on this particular agenda and no more or no other delegate wishes to address the committee formally via the speakers list. Understanding this, I would like to close the list of speakers for this meeting. Are there any objections? So if there are any objections, you can raise them. If there are none, the speakers list closes. Yes, sir.
Can we appeal against the decision of the chair?
With respect to
right
closing the...
Yeah, right of reply. Means after I ask for a right of reply and the chair gives a no, then can I appeal against the decision?
Unfortunately, no appeal is available to such a discretion of the chair. The right of reply is granted, or rather decided whether to be awarded or not, only by the chairperson. And there is no appeal available to this decision. Because again, reason being that when you're making a point of order, that is a public statement that you're making. But when you're requesting a right of reply, it's an internal diplomatic note that goes to the chairperson, which is not available for the perusal of the entire committee. So in which case, it remains confidential and it is expressed only when the chair gives you an opportunity. All right. Right over there. Yes, ma'am.
When we write the right of reply note, so do we have to just get up and give, or we have to pass it through someone?
All right, thank you for that question. Within your committee setup, apart from you, apart from the members of the bureau, there would be secretariat members who would be assisting in the functioning of the committee. These members of the secretariat are called liaison officers. These officers are available for you to pass any diplomatic chit from you to another delegate or from you to the bureau. All right? So these liaison officers will help you communicate within the committee setup in an informal note method. Now, it's very important, thank you for bringing this question once again, that when you're using diplomatic notes in the committee, please make sure that they are strictly diplomatic, official, formal, and has to do with committee work only. Requesting company for coffee or any other kind of expression which does not concern the committee's work or agenda would not be allowed or will strictly be condemned. So please keep out of such requests. If any delegate receives a note which is not favorable, please report it to the liaison officers. Liaison officers are instructed to make sure that the content of the note is of such a nature that is beneficial to the committee. And anything that is personal in nature may not be written in that. Now, again, another thing being that sometimes you would observe in conferences that chairpersons will declare all notes should pass through the chairperson. No, that is very much against your sovereignty to allow something like that to happen. If something like that happens, it's immediately a point of order. You suggest that Secretary General has clearly suggested that diplomatic notes will not be read by the chairperson. It has to go through the liaison officer, and only liaison officer can read it. Okay? No other person apart from the liaison officer is allowed to read your diplomatic note. It's a request. Please keep it absolutely strictly professional. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we proceed to what is a motion. A motion in any kind of a formal setting is a request made by a delegate to direct the committee in a particular fashion. So, you have the concept of committee time that I have introduced to you right in the beginning, that the committee has a certain amount of time that it can deal with. This entire committee time is divided by the discretion and will of the chairperson as to how the discussion should take place. But if at any point in time, you as a delegate feel that we need to direct our committee's time for a type of discussion in this manner, then you can always do so by making a procedural request, which is called a motion. So how do you make a request for a motion? You suggest that, you raise your placard once again. The chairperson will ask you, Honorable Delegate, to what point or motion do you rise? You suggest, Delegate of India would like to suggest a motion to, then you state the motion, what you would want to do. What are the types of motions available to you? I would come to that. You can motion to adjourn the debate. So if there is no consensus on this point, then 2 delegates may be invited to speak for and 2 delegates against. Now, what is adjournment of debate? Delegates may put forth a motion to adjourn debate during the discussion of any matter, and if there is no consensus, it may be put to vote. Motions for adjournment of debate are normally adopted without deciding on a time to renew debate. This motion terminates discussion and prevents voting. It is often referred to as a no-action motion because it prevents action from being taken on a draft resolution. Difficult words, let me simplify. When you request for a motion to adjourn debate, the debate involves what? The topic that you're discussing, right? So any kind of debate on the topic is being requested to be adjourned. Do we all understand the meaning of adjournment? Right? That we break the session and we do not know when we are going to reconvene this session. Sometimes adjournments have a reconvening time, sometimes they do not. So when such a motion is requested, we do not know when we are going to come back to discussion on this topic again. So if you feel that a motion or a particular topic has been discussed sufficiently and you think that there is no further action that needs to be taken on it, then you can always motion to adjourn the debate. If everyone is in agreement, it does not require any vote. If there is one person who is against it, then in that case, the chair will invite 2 people to speak in favor of the adjournment motion, 2 people to speak against the adjournment motion, and then it will be voted upon. All right? How does the chair again try to get consent on this? The chair will suggest that the Honorable Delegate of India has suggested that the motion, has suggested a motion for adjournment of debate. I understand everyone is in consensus. If there are any objections, they need to be raised now. If there are objections, then well and fine. If there are no objections, then the debate is adjourned. Okay? So, it basically, when you adjourn a debate, you don't know when you are going to come back to discussing that topic again. You do not know, or you cannot take action on that topic again. What is taking action? Basically voting on a resolution. In UN, voting on a resolution is called taking action on a particular matter. So when you adjourn debate, you cannot take action on a resolution. That topic gets stalled. Is that clear? Why would you do something like that? The very reason that you come for the conference is so that you would want to go for a resolution. But at times it happens that some delegate out of their country's policy again suggests a motion to adjourn debate. DPRK, you're discussing in Security Council the question concerning Korean Peninsula. Do you think DPRK would be fine discussing something like that? Do you think India would be fine having the Kashmir issue discussed at the UN? One point in time it was. Today it's not. So what it would do is it would immediately, even at the beginning of the session, it would say motion to adjourn debate. Obviously, such a motion will fail probably, but again, that could be voted upon, right? So adjournments are also suggested depending on your country's policy, or the second option would be if you think that this discussion is not going ahead anywhere, a resolution is not visible in the near future, in which case you can always motion to adjourn debate. Is that clear? Any question regarding adjournment of debate? Yes, sir. Right over there. Could we have the microphone?
Chaotic conditions, are there adjournment? Is there adjournment of the session or something like that? In chaotic conditions, if there's a chaos?
Thank you. We would not be hopefully facing a situation where there is an utter chaos in the committee. The role of the chairperson and secretary would be to ensure that the chaos does not come into picture. If something of that sort does happen, then an adjournment could be called very well. But normally, something of this nature will not happen. Why? Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with diplomats of member states, and they are required to conduct themselves in a particular fashion. Sometimes national parliaments forget their role or their behavioral conducts. We have observed that. But in the UN till now, such a chaos has not broken into. And in our Pune MUN conferences also, this hasn't happened before. So hopefully we will not encounter such a situation. But if you do, then yes, adjournment is an order that you can suggest. Any other question? Yes, ma'am, followed by sir towards the end.
Do you have to give a reason for adjourning?
Any reason for adjournment of the debate? I mentioned just a few moments ago that if your country's policy requires you to suggest an adjournment of the debate, if the agenda is not in your favor and it is basically going to take an action against your country, of course your country would want to adjourn the debate. So from a country's perspective, that's how it functions. The second possibility could be if the agenda does not see an end in the near future. Like discussion is not going in a proper fashion in which it should. The chairperson has also tried to build consensus in the committee, but it has failed, in which case adjournment of the debate could be proposed. You have a follow-up question? Please go ahead.
What I meant to ask was that, do you have to state the reason why you're adjourning the debate?
When you are suggesting a motion for adjournment, then the chairperson has the authority to request you to state the reason. But as such, the procedure does not require you to state the reason. If the chair asks, then you may have to. Yes, sir, towards the end.
What is the time limit for the motion?
As in, if a motion for adjournment is proposed?
No, any kind of motion towards the topic.
Is your question put, or rather phrased, keeping in mind the other format of the conference, like moderated, unmoderated caucuses?
Yeah.
We do not have those caucuses or motions at all. So in which case...
So is this the only kind of motion that's there?
We will be dealing with the other motions also in the due course.
Okay.
So just be with us, and we will be telling you which motions would come forth and if there is any time requirement for it. But motion for adjournment, a motion is proposed. If it requires a vote, the voting happens, and then the discussion closes if it's in favor. Any other question regarding adjournment? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so how would you raise, would you give it in writing or raise a placard or something?
No, a motion is always suggested or addressed to the chair in the committee setup. You don't need to give it in writing. When you raise your placard and the chair recognizes you to speak, then you suggest that the delegate of so-and-so country would like a motion for adjournment of debate. And if the chair requests you to state the reason, then you may state the reason. That's all.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions regarding motion for adjournment? Seeing none, we would proceed to motion for closure of debate. Now, what's the difference between adjournment and closure? In adjournment, you cannot vote on the resolution. Even if there is a resolution on that topic, you cannot vote on it. Why? Because the debate has been adjourned. But when a closure of debate has been requested through a motion, then in that case, the delegates can put it to vote and then enter into direct voting procedure on that resolution. All right? A resolution, do remember, at the end of it, needs to be voted upon, and only then it could be adopted. So for that reason, before you start with the voting of the resolution, you need to bring a closure to the debate that's happening in the committee. So you're giving speeches in the committee, you would be having informal sessions, formal sessions, etc. And you have to give that a closure before you enter into the voting. That's the logical process how it appears. All right? So take the example of your regular term exams. Do the term exams happen at the same time when your regular classes are happening? No. Your regular classes are declared to be closed at a point in time. You are given some time for your preparation, and then the examinations happen. In the same manner, the discussion that has been taking place in your committee needs a closure, and only then the final examination, that is the voting on the resolution, can take place. So a closure of debate is suggested when you want the resolution to be put on vote. Motions for closure of debate terminate discussion and authorize the meeting to proceed immediately to a vote on a draft resolution. The main difference between this motion and the motion for adjournment of debate is that the motion for adjournment of debate leads to, or rather this motion leads to an immediate action on the resolution, and adjournment of debate prevents any action from being taken. Is that clear? If you suggest a motion to close debate, then in that case you can vote on the resolution. If you suggest a motion to adjourn debate, you cannot do anything to do with the resolution. The debate comes to an end. Okay? Any questions regarding closure of debate? Yes, ma'am.
Is this a necessary procedure before you move on to making the resolution? Like you have to raise your placard and just say motion for closure or something?
A resolution can be made throughout the committee proceeding. And even before you have arrived to your committee, you can always make a resolution from home and get it. It's absolutely allowed, and that's how resolutions are written. When countries come to the UN, they already have pre-written resolutions. So resolution writing process can happen at any time. But if you want to vote on the resolution, then before that you have to close the debate by motion to close debate. Any questions regarding closure of debate? Seeing none, All right, so
I have a doubt.
you have a doubt.
Yeah.
All right. go
What
ahead.
if one country wants the disclosure of wants to close the debate, but the other countries don't want to? Then
Then it would be voted upon,
okay.
and whichever side the majority tilts towards, that decision will be taken. So if the majority wants the debate to be closed, then it's closed. If it's not, then we continue with the discussion. Any other question? Seeing none, we move to the motion for suspension or adjournment of a meeting. Now, what does that mean? We dealt with adjournment and closure of debate. This is adjournment or suspension of a meeting. So when you come to the committee or when your committee starts its session, that's called the meeting of the session. When you're talking about closing or adjourning a debate, it has to do with the agenda. But over here, this has to do with your entire meeting. Okay? So how does this happen? This motion needs to be voted upon. It cannot happen merely on consensus. Sorry, if there is like an absolute consensus, in which case it can be, the entire meeting could be adjourned or suspended, but the voting procedure is a must. In the other motions, or in the other motions as to adjournment of debate or closure of debate, without vote also, that motion could have been closed by general consensus. But over here, it has to be voted upon. Delegates may put forth a motion for suspension or adjournment at any point in time. Motions for suspension and adjournment are normally adopted along with an indication of when the meeting will resume. This is a useful tool for pausing the debate so that informal consultations can take place. All right? So now here comes the important part, that during the course of your discussions, if you want to go for an informal consultation, if you want the committee to break the formal set of discussion and start with an informal discussion where you do not follow the exact procedure and protocol, you directly communicate to the delegates in an informal setup, than getting chance one by one to come to the podium, state the opening lines, and then go through the very formal process. Without that, if you want an informal consultation to take place, a motion for suspension or adjournment of a meeting could be called for. If you wish to go for lunch, this is the motion that's coming to your help. If you want to break for tea, this is the motion that comes to your help. So what does the chair do? The chair takes your motion. It suggests that fine, I'm allocating so and so or this much amount of time for this particular motion, and you will reconvene in, let's say, 1 hour, or we'll reconvene in 20 minutes. A reconvening time is always given for a motion which is adjourning or suspending the meeting. Is that clear? Now, how and what type of informal consultation can take place, we will also deal with that. But before that, we have been suggested that people might require a small break for 5 minutes so that you can unwind and we can reconvene. Okay, let's try the voting pattern out here. How many of you are in favor of adjourning this meeting for 5 minutes and reconvening, or let's say 10 minutes and reconvening after 10 minutes? Delegates against? By show of placard, majority are in favor of an adjournment, and therefore this meeting is adjourned. We shall reconvene in the next 10 minutes. I call this House to order. Members, please be seated. Members of the Secretariat are requested to maintain their positions, or if you wish to have a seat, please be seated. Commencing back with the session regarding procedure, are there any questions that you have with respect to what has been told to you till now? We have covered motion for suspension or adjournment of a meeting till now. I have been made to understand that there are certain questions or queries that have come up from delegates who have participated in certain other conferences before, or who have done Pune MUN last year and the procedure was slightly different. If you have any questions, this is your time. Please ask.
A lot of them went.
Yes, ma'am.
This is about the general speaking list. You said the committee members, the bureau people, they'll write down the name of the people who have raised their placards and accordingly made that list. So will that list be visible to us?
Yes, that list would be visible to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
This break can be taken how many times?
Which break?
In the debate.
All right. A break of that nature could be taken only when we are required to. So the very necessary requirements are one, the session for lunch. The other would be if you are breaking for tea. Primarily these two. And the other times when you could use a motion for suspension or adjournment of a meeting is when you wish to enter into an informal discussion. Formal and informal discussions we are going to cover in the next slide. Any other questions? All right. Yes, ma'am.
Which committees come under the GM?
General Assembly, all right. So, fine. Which are the committees which come under the General Assembly? Specifically, please note the General Assembly 1, which is the DISEC, Disarmament and International Security Committee. This is your first committee which comes under the General Assembly. Committee number 2 is the General Assembly second committee, Economic and Financial. The third committee is General Assembly 3, which is the Social, Humanitarian and Cultural Committee. DISEC, your agenda is something to do with nuclear disarmament. ECOFIN, climate change, if I'm not wrong. Then SOCOM, you're dealing with promotion and protection of rights of children. Then the fourth committee is the Special Political and Decolonization Committee, which is the General Assembly fourth committee. That is dealing with the peaceful uses of outer space. And the sixth committee of the General Assembly, that is the General Assembly Legal Committee. This is open to the students from law colleges only. And this committee also falls under the mandate of the General Assembly. And this committee is dealing with criminal accountability of UN officials. Only these 5 committees form part of General Assembly. And in Pune MUN, when you have the plenary session going on, members of only these 5 committees are expected to attend the plenary session. Nobody will be adjudicated in the plenary session. It is a formal procedure that is required for us to start your committee proceedings. Okay? For further clarification, HLPF SD is not part of General Assembly. UNEP, not part of General Assembly. And the rest, other commissions and councils that are there in the senior group are also not part of the General Assembly. Is that clear? Right? Any other questions? Right, sir? Out there?
Like, according to the point of order, you told that example of our chance is second and US's chances. So, like, if you want to skip our chance and keep it afterwards, and
You can, sure. So if you have given your name and it appears in the general speakers list at a certain position, but you decide that I do not wish to speak at this position and want to change my order. Changing order is possible, and you can always request your chairperson to change your order, but you cannot specify where you are supposed to be put. There is only one place that can happen. If you do not wish to speak at the given position that is already there, you can request for a change, in which case you will be put towards the end of the speakers list. Is that clear? You cannot specify I'm 5th, please put me 7th, and there are 11 people on the list. No. If you're 5th and you want to change your position, you cannot go ahead. You can't be placed somewhere between towards below, like towards the end. But you can be put directly towards the end as the last speaker, and that is how we can proceed. All right? Any other questions? Okay, see.
Hi.
Fine. Where? Sorry, the slide is slightly dazzling. I can't find you. Where are you?
It's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. There was no mention of the point while you were giving the presentation, so I would like to ask whether that is valid.
Could you repeat your question?
There was no. Okay. There was no mention of the point of personal privilege in your presentation, so I would like to know whether that is valid in this particular MUN.
Right. This particular MUN will have only the point of order. There are no other points that are available to the delegates. So no point of personal privilege or no point of parliamentary inquiry is available.
Then how to excuse yourself?
All right. So, fine, friends. there is a concept called point of personal privilege, which is used in certain other conferences. This is again a parliamentary procedure that has nothing to do with the United Nations. Why is it used? Let's say if we have fancy committee rooms where there are air conditioners and stuff, and you want to increase the cooling, decrease the cooling, something that makes you feel uncomfortable in the committee and you want to address it. Secondly, if you would like to excuse yourself from the room to visit the restroom or something like that. And if there is any other position that is causing discomfort to you directly, then in that case, you can use the point of personal privilege in those conferences. But over here, we recognize the fact that you are representing as a diplomat of another country. At the UN, no country or no diplomat will actually take permission for something like that. What they would do is, if they wish to excuse themselves for any purpose, be it official, be it personal, they would just walk out of the committee, stand up, walk out, but only ensure that no other person is addressing the committee at that time. If somebody is speaking and if you walk out, it is disrespectful towards them. So all that you need to do is ensure that nobody is speaking at that point in time or the chair is not addressing the committee, and you can just excuse yourself from the room. The chairpersons and secretaries are or will be instructed that this is the mandate that we are following, and they will be fine with that, so don't worry about it. And if you want to make any clarification with respect to the procedure, you can always approach the secretary at a time when nobody else is speaking. You can always go and approach the secretary, or you can write to them and they can send you a written clarification. Any other question?
How
Yes,
do
sir.
we know that, as we're giving a speech, how do we know that time is, we have exceeded the time we've taken?
The chairperson and the secretary would be keeping time on your behalf. And since, let's say, 2 minutes, they will let you know by either a tap or some kind of indication that your speaking time is coming towards an end, that you may need to wind up your speech, right? Now, we observe that in some conferences, the chairpersons deal with, or rather, communicate with delegates in a manner which is not very favorable to the atmosphere of the committee. Sometimes I've observed that a delegate is speaking, 2 minutes is the time, let's say. After 1.5 minutes, delegate, stop it. Delegate, time up. No, this is not the way that chairperson should talk to you. So we would definitely be instructing them in mode of conduct. If they still go against it, then please make sure that you let them know that, Honorable Chairperson, it would be appreciated if you treat the member state representative with an additional aspect of respect. Okay? So the ideal way of letting a delegate know that the time is over is to give either a single tap, like that's the process, single tap at 1 minute 30 seconds and double tap at 2 minutes to make you know that your time is elapsed. But at the same time, now, at the UN, the speaking time is 15 minutes, and I told you that V.R. Krishna Menon spoke for 8.5 hours. How did that happen? Because if a delegate wishes to continue their speech for as long as they want, it is permissible at the UN, and the chair can do nothing about it. So, yes, you have that much of power. We are giving it to you, but do not misuse it. Just make sure that what you say is condensed and is in the best interest of your country and to the committee as well. Because others are also participating in this conference, we have equal responsibility to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to properly participate. So stick to the time limits given. If you're making a very essential point and you're making good sense in the committee and your speech needs to continue further, the chair will give you additional time. We have a provision for that also. You may not request additional time. The chairperson, if they imagine or if they find that you are making proper sense and you need to be given additional time, to that extent, the chairperson will extend your time limit. All right. Any other queries? Yes, ma'am.
Suppose your time has elapsed and you still need to make a few points, then do you get extra time? How do you say that we need more time and we need to make more points?
All right. So in such a situation where your time has already lapsed and the chairperson has decided to not extend your time, you may request the chairperson once that the delegate would appreciate, let's say, a minute more to substantiate the point, or use your best judgment to see that, can I state these points at a later instance? If possible, it would be very appreciable if you can postpone those points for the next time you get a chance on the general speakers list. And it would appear very considerate on your behalf that you are keeping in mind the interest of other members also. Okay? So you can always make a request. The chairperson may or may not allow depending on the position of the committee at that time. But extension, it should not be a problem. Any other question? Seeing none, we would proceed to the modes of discussion. Till now, I have been dealing with the formal mode of discussion, that is the speakers list. You know that there is a list of speakers, and at times I have been mentioning things called formal or informal discussions. Okay? So when you're talking about formal debate, the general speakers list is the only method of formal debate in the committee. Everything that you need to state in the committee and that statement has to be recorded by the UN, then in that case you have to make a formal statement through the general speakers list. The other method of dealing with an agenda is known as informal debate. Under informal debate, the committee is adjourned, or the committee or the meeting is suspended. If you notice, we dealt with this motion immediately preceding this, a motion for suspension or adjournment of a meeting. This motion will come to use at this point in time when we are talking about informal debate. If you think that it would be in the best interest of the committee to now break formal session and convene an informal session where you can directly have a word with other delegates, cutting down on the formal aspects of it. Formal aspects as in not communication. Communication is always to be in formal manner. But the setup could be changed. One person need not stick to the podium and speak in that manner. In an informal session, people can freely move in the committee, can form blocks. As I told you yesterday, you can form your own regional blocks or alliances within the committee and start discussing in a manner which would be fruitful for addressing the agenda. And for that, informal discussions are very important. Within informal debate, we have two types of debates or manners in which we can conduct the discussion. One is called the formal informal. Take a wild guess, what would be the second one? Informal informal. All right? Yes, as it sounds pretty humorous, but that is how the UN functions. Formal informal, informal informal. Methods of our informal discussion. What's the difference? Well, let's start with informal informal first. During your course of formal discussions, if you wish to have a bilateral meaning you and another country only, two countries, or if you need to have a multilateral meeting, means you and a group of other countries, 5, 6, 10, whatever. If such a discussion is required, but you think that disrupting the entire committee for this does not help, in that case, see to it that no person is talking at that point in time or addressing the committee, and communicate within yourself through diplomatic chits that we would like to convene an informal session. Write to the other delegates who you want to be part of this informal session, and if they all agree, then rise and walk out of the committee, stand outside the committee and have your informal discussion. Informal discussion changes only the setting. You still have to discuss your agenda. Informal discussion doesn't mean that you would be discussing anything which has nothing to do with the Pune MUN conference, or no, not Pune MUN in that manner. If I keep it that general, you can discuss food outside, but no. Something to do with your committee, something to do with your agenda. If you want the mode of discussion to change, you think that there are certain necessary changes that you need to make in your policies, or if you want the committees to come together or countries to come together and start drafting a resolution, you think you have identified certain allies in the committee and you want to come together and start writing a resolution, and you think breaking the entire committee into a discussion will not be fruitful, so then handpick those people. Handpick as in you write to them that I wish to convene an informal session with you outside the committee at so and so time. Would you please be interested? This would be the reason for the informal discussion. And you can make this proposition to one delegate or more than one delegate, and then you can just walk out of the committee and convene your informal debate. Is that clear? you do not require a motion for an informal debate. You can just walk out at any point in time while the general speakers list is going on. Just make sure nobody is addressing the committee, because again, when somebody's talking and you walk out, it looks disrespectful. All right? Any questions regarding informal? The chairpersons will not stop you. They can maximum, what they can do is, they can put a limit to the number of people walking out. Because at the end of the day, we have to also maintain quorum, right? So they can say that, fine, quorum needs to be maintained. Apart from the quorum, n number of people can go out. We don't mind. But quorum always needs to be maintained. Okay? If there is no quorum, then in that case, we can't help it. Right? So do we have any question regarding informal discussions? Reasons why you can have an informal discussion is, okay, let me give you an example of how we conducted our sessions back in Global Model UN in South Korea. We used to come to the committee once in the morning, give our opening statement, and then that's it, disappear from the committee. We'll just ensure that there are certain members present to maintain the quorum, and out of 193, almost like a good 110 delegates are outside. And yeah, the convention center was massive, enormous, so we had that much space for 110 to go outside in another room to sit and convene our informal sessions. But over here, the number would be small, and you could just have the space outside your committee to have your informal discussions. And why do you need informal discussions? Because formal method of discussions or debate may not always be fruitful in reaching solutions or conclusions, right? If you're continuously put in a formal setup, then there is a hindrance to your discussion. So UN believes that informal discussions should take place more than formal discussions. And that is why the availability of informal discussions have been provided. We used to use our informal sessions to draft the resolution. So our informal discussions used to last for early in the morning when we used to come to the committee till 2:30, 3:30 a.m. midnight. So sit and draft the resolution, have discussions, because in those 15 days we had to come up with a structure that is economically feasible, internationally sound, and can actually be a document which the Rio Plus 20 can refer to. At the same time, you have limited time over here, so make sure what you do is logically sound and policy-wise correct. And you can have a discussion with your other members in that line. Any question regarding informal? Yes, ma'am.
If you are invited by a delegate for the informal discussion and you do not wish to go, then what do you do? How do you convey?
What do you think you should do? If you do not want to, that is the highest form of will that you're expressing. That's it, don't go. Say, I do not wish to attend the informal session. Right? Nobody can force you to do anything in this conference. If a chairperson points out and says, delegate of so-and-so country, you are going to speak next and I want you to speak next. Well, the person might have good intentions to make everyone speak and give equal chance, but you cannot do that with a diplomat. They have to be given that much respect that if they do not wish to do something, they don't do it. If they wish to do something, then according to the procedure, they do it. Right? So if you don't want to participate in informal session, write respectfully that I do not wish to. This is my reason. You may or may not provide a reason.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
What happens to the people who are inside? Do they continue with the discussion? The people who are inside after, people who are taking outside the informal session?
The discussion proceeds.
Okay.
There's a general speakers list that goes on. If your country's name is on the general speakers list and you are still outside, your name will be struck. And it doesn't automatically come towards the end. The name is struck. So once you come back, you have to re-enroll your name on the general speakers list. Any other query? All right, seeing none, let's think about what is the formal informal session. A formal informal session is convened within the committee, and the entire committee breaks for it. You are not allowed to leave the committee. You have to stay within the committee and have a formal informal discussion. This will disrupt the proceeding of the entire committee, and therefore a motion to adjourn the meeting or the motion to suspend the meeting is required. Is that clear? So formal informal sessions can be suggested. So how you suggest a formal informal session is that you raise your placard, the chairperson recognizes you, you suggest that motion or delegate of India would like to move for adjourning the meeting for a span of 30 minutes. All right? And you may or may not mention that you want to convene it for a formal informal session. Okay? So the chairperson gets your request. The chairperson puts this motion to vote. That delegates, we have received a motion request from so-and-so delegate regarding a formal informal session or adjourning the meeting for a formal informal session, and this is the time limit. Are you all in favor? The ones who are in favor will raise their placard. The ones who are against may raise their placard, and then you can enter into a formal informal session. What is the difference between a formal informal and formal informal? Informal informal session does not disrupt the entire committee. It happens outside the setting of the committee, while a formal informal discussion happens within the committee. A chairperson ceases to be the chairperson when a formal informal session is happening. The chairperson will participate in the discussions of the committee while a formal informal session is going on, because they will also be allocated a country. And you have every authority to ask the chairperson to provide their opinion from that country's point of view. If they refuse to do it, well, that is again their diplomatic will that they are exercising, but we would ensure, or we would try to make sure that the chairpersons also contribute in consensus building within the committee. All right? So if the chairperson ceases to be the chairperson during that time, who reconvenes the session after 30 minutes or whenever? The committee secretary. The secretary has to reconvene the session. If the secretary does not reconvene the session, the chairperson cannot assume his or her role as a chair immediately. So the secretary has to reconvene the session. The session will come to formal meeting, and only then it will proceed. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Followed by you.
Is there any limit to the amount of time for which we can have a formal informal session?
As such, there is no limit whatsoever, but the chairperson can, in the best interest of the committee, decide what could be a maximum limit. Yes, ma'am.
Is this the same as an unmoderated caucus?
More or less very similar to the unmoderated caucus in the other procedure.
So will we be having those caucuses in general?
No, we will not be having any kind of caucuses or sessions known as moderated or unmoderated caucus. This is the only method how the debate proceeds.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir.
How the votes are counted?
How the votes are counted? Fine. So first method is to ask the committee, are we in consensus? If nobody objects, then in that case you are in consensus and you go ahead. This is also a form of voting. If you are not in agreement, then you raise your placard and you state your reason. In which case you go into show of placard voting. In show of placard voting, the committee votes are not counted as such. The strength is seen just by the show of placards. So what we did before breaking into this 10 minutes slot out here was that I requested you to vote in favor and against. I did not count. How did I understand that number of people are in majority? Because those many hands went up, or those many placards went up. So by show of strength or majority, it could be understood. And on the other hand, the ones who are in minority get defeated in such a vote. What if the chairperson or the secretary is unable to understand if there is a clear majority or not? Both appear to be same. In that case, the number of votes in favor and against are then counted, right? If still another delegate requests that this kind of voting has not really done justice and the chairperson agrees to it, then a roll call vote can also be taken. What is a roll call vote? Your country's name will be called out and you are supposed to say yes or no. All right? There could always be human error in calculation. So I calculate and find there are 20 members in favor and there are 19 against. Another delegate can always say that, well, I don't think so, that is the correct number. So in this case, you don't again call them to raise their hand and recount. You have to move into a roll call voting where your country's name will be called and you will have to say either a yes or no, as depending on the motion. Mayur, could you approach the dais once? Are there any other questions regarding formal and informal session? Yes, are there any other questions regarding the formal and informal session? Yes, ma'am.
You said the chairperson is also a delegate of a country.
That's right.
And what if he wants to have an informal debate? Who will he seek permission from? Like the entire discussion will be on hold if he wants to have an informal debate.
Right. If the chairperson wishes to suggest that the committee should go into a formal informal, not informal. The chairperson cannot go into an informal session. If the chairperson wants to make the committee break for a formal informal session, then the chair can also motion for it. The chair can suggest that I move to adjourn this motion and I hope there is no objection to it. Are there any objections? And then we proceed in the same manner. Right? But a chairperson may not go for an informal session. Any other queries?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Why would we want to call for a formal informal session?
Because often what happens is, in a formal setting of debate, the questions that came up earlier, that what if a country puts in a direct accusation on my country and I'm unable to respond immediately? So, in a formal setup, you have to wait until the next chance you get. But when an informal setup, there is nobody who is actually moderating the procedure. You would be on your own to help yourselves with a proper discussion in an informal setting. In which case, if an accusation comes towards you in an informal meeting, you can directly rebut to it. So, informal sessions help facilitate the debate better. You can always ask the delegates to, let's sit and decide on this agenda or this sub-agenda right now. Let's focus on this. You cannot do this in a formal setting. So when you're in the general speakers list, you will have to wait for the next person to speak, or you can expect that the people are speaking about it, but you cannot make them do so. So in an informal setup, you can always request them to go for such a discussion, and there would be greater chances of them agreeing to it.
Sir, but also I was going to ask,
Yes.
if you want to call for a formal, if you want to discuss with only a select few
Yes.
of the committee,
Right.
but there are more but they'll definitely
More
cause the
than-
quorum to be disrupted.
All right, so in a committee of 40, you think that 35 are required for this discussion, 5 are not required. So in the best interest of the entire committee, you can always request for a formal informal session. 5 is a small number. So it's definitely going to disrupt the quorum. So in which case you can ask for a formal informal session. Or the second option available with you is, you can hold the discussion in small groups. 10 can go first. In the next meeting, 3 from the previous group can stay back and the rest 10 can come. That could also happen. But if something like some event that needs to be discussed which is greater than the required quorum that is required, so in which case you can always request for a formal informal session. It would be in the best interest of the committee to go for a formal informal session.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Are there any other queries? So, seeing none, proceeding to what are the ideal qualities or parameters that are being looked at when you're performing or when you are role-playing in the committee. In some conferences, we do have something called a marking scheme, but in Pune MUN, we discourage anything like a marking scheme or pattern. The overall performance of the delegate is identified by the chairpersons through the 2 days of discussion and deliberation. And the qualities that we are looking at are, firstly, role realization. To what extent you identify and connect with the role of a diplomat and you role play in the committee. Okay, so role realization is an important aspect. Secondly, to what extent you adhere to the foreign policy of your country. The chairpersons and secretaries are very well versed with the agenda that they are dealing with in your committee, and also with respect to the foreign policies of the countries which are participating in that committee. In which case, they will know if you're making an error in your foreign policy. So adherence to foreign policy is also an important aspect. Procedural accuracy is required. See to it that you maintain procedure throughout the committee. There are not many things in this particular method or procedure to actually adhere to. So it's a very small and short procedure that you have. Please make sure that you stick to it, and it would be beneficial for you. Diplomacy is required. To what measure and extent can you convince the other member states to your point or the policy of your country? That would be your aspect of diplomacy. Diplomatic courtesy is again something which is different from diplomacy. It includes how you conduct yourselves with other delegates and other members in the organization. Important, very important aspect of a diplomat, this entire conduct. Drafting. If you're writing a resolution or if you're making any kind of documents, even if you're writing to the chairperson, drafting also includes your diplomatic notes, which may not go through the chairperson, but if the liaison officer comes across something which is not very handsome, the liaison officer will let the chairperson know about it, which is also going to affect your impression with respect to drafting. And at the same time, oratory, one of the last features that comes in here. Reason being, a good diplomat may be a good orator, but may not be a good orator at the same time. Diplomacy has very little to do with oratory. Oratory is only an additional benefit, and we are an open, inclusive organization. If people have difficulty in expressing themselves in any form, then it will not be going against them at all. So oratory is one of the last components of your performance. So speaking abilities, yes, they are important, but not so important as to affect the rest of your performance if you have the other 6 or 7 criteria that has been provided. Any questions regarding the parameters? Yes, ma'am.
Since the Security Council has double delegation,
yes.
Who would be the person going there and speaking on the podium?
That has to be decided mutually by the
So it
members
can
of the
be both the
delegation.
persons as well, or does it have to be like one of them?
It has to be only one at any given point in time.
Thank you.
Any other question? Security Council will have a best delegation kind of an award. There would not be any individual delegate winning it. Any queries? So seeing none, I'm proceeding. I'm highlighting once again the core policies that you need to abide to. Make sure that you do not make any kind of statement or behave in any manner which will be unbecoming of you as a diplomat. So these are the basic practices that you must adhere to. And finally, these committees, I'm just re-highlighting them. I'm going to skip through these 2 slides and go to our most important part. I'll just take 5 more minutes to skip through one of the most important aspects of today's session, which is the resolution. We are going to send the slides to you for the resolution as well. All right. So, okay, it's just going to take some time. Okay. Fine. Now, the entire object of your discussion and deliberation through those 2 days would be to come to a solution. In official language, in the United Nations, some committees draft a resolution. The other committees on commissions per se, especially the commissions, they may not draft a resolution. The commissions can come up with something like a report. The chairperson of your commission will guide you with respect to that. But a resolution is a general document which gives solutions or which puts down on paper the solutions to your topic. There are 3 essential parts to a resolution. One is the heading. The heading consists of people who are writing the resolution. They are known as the sponsors. It contains the agenda on which you are going to write the resolution on, and it contains the name of your committee which is preparing the resolution. Then the second part of the resolution is called preambulatory clauses. Now, what do we understand by preamble? Have you all studied a bit of constitution in our school? Civics has a preamble, if I'm not wrong. So what does the preamble do? Any idea? Yes, sir? Could we have a mic over here? Yes, sir.
It's an introductory document to the Constitution, and it explains the ideas of the
So,
Constitution.
to make it crisp, it imbibes the most, or rather lays down the core principles or core values that the rest of the document is going to follow, right? So preamble is basically for setting the tone and giving the general description and notion for that document. Switch that off. Yep. So preambulatory clauses in a resolution do precisely that. They give a general description to the resolution and gives you the backdrop for taking any kind of action. Now, when you are talking about the actions that you take, which are basically the operative clauses, you need to have reasons for them. And those reasons could be identified from the preambulatory clauses. So preambulatory clauses lay down the reasons or backdrop for the resolution, and operative clauses give you the actions that you are going to take through that resolution. All right? Moving quickly, the heading consists of the committee, the subject of the resolution, and sponsored by. A resolution can be sponsored by any number of countries. Even an individual country or individual state can write a resolution. So it is up to you then how you convince others and help them, or rather help yourself to get their support. But even a single individual country can also draft a resolution. So are we clear with the heading slide? Any queries? Yes, sir? Could you
Will it have a draft resolution number?
Yes, draft resolution number need not be written by the delegates. Draft resolution number is provided by the executive board member. So when you are writing a resolution, at that time you need not give a draft resolution number. That is provided by the executive board or the bureau. Any queries regarding the heading? Yes, ma'am.
Your subject has to be phrased exactly as the agenda. Yeah?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
The subject would be the agenda in exact words. Any other queries regarding the heading? All right. Seeing none, I'm moving to the preambulatory clauses. It gives the purpose of the resolution. It outlines the history of the problem. It shows how the topic falls in the mandate of the committee. And it shows that there is a need for the United Nations to find a solution to it. So through your preambulatory clauses, the resolution can show that these are the past actions that have been taken. These are the reasons why we feel that there is further action needed to be taken, and how this committee is in proper hold of this topic to take a decision upon. Now, preambulatory clauses always begin with a passive verb, and it ends with a comma. Now, what do we mean by this? Okay, so if you are discussing a particular topic, let's say nuclear disarmament, and we want to give a backdrop to this particular resolution, so how do we go about it? We know that there are certain resolutions that the United Nations has already adopted, and we want to make sure that the resolution highlights those previous resolutions. Okay? How we do it? We suggest, or we write, that recalling, which is a passive verb, we start our clause by saying recalling resolution number so and so, so and so, so and so, 4 or 5 of them as they are, and then we write which express the opinion of this committee with regard to nuclear disarmament. So what we do is we show that these are the previous resolutions which the UN has adopted with respect to this agenda. Now, giving example of preambulatory clauses further, fully aware of the effects of the waste of nuclear reactors, realizing that the half-life of such waste is 10,000 years. So what this does is it gives you the reason for drafting a resolution. The discussion that has taken place in the committee is shown through the preambulatory clauses. That yes, if we are going to take so-and-so decisions as we are doing in operative clauses, these are our reasons for the same. And that's where the preambulatory clauses come to picture. So we can always take any kind of sentence and convert it to a preambulatory clause. So let me give you a statement and you can try doing this immediately. Okay, reprocessing techniques have been examined and we have found these techniques to be futile. Anybody? Yes, ma'am?
Having examined the... Yeah.
Go ahead.
I don't remember what it is, so...
It is exactly the same statement that I put in a regular sentence and we converted it. So yes, so a simple sentence could always be converted into a preambulatory clause by identifying firstly the verb and then just convert it into a passive verb. Your grammar skills will come into picture over here. So, okay, give me a statement and see if you want me to change it into a preambulatory clause. Any kind of statement. Anybody? Take some time, think of it. Any statement that you want me to convert into a preambulatory clause. Okay, let me think of one then if... Fine. The United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development took place in Rio de Janeiro from so-and-so date to so-and-so date and discussed the issue of sustainable development and Millennium Development Goals to the extent that certain measures were taken and we agree to it. Fine? Simple sentence? No, as in, it is not a preambulatory clause. So how do we convert this into a preambulatory clause? So what we are basically doing is we are dealing with a sentence that is covering the effect of a conference. And what we do is we identify the verb that is present in the sentence and convert into the best suitable passive verb that's there. So recalling the Rio Conference on Sustainable Development, which took place at Rio de Janeiro on so-and-so dates, and further recalling the resolutions or documents that were adopted in this conference. Okay, this ends. So this was a huge sentence. I'm ending this at this point. I'm going to write another preambulatory clause which says, reaffirming the support of this committee to the documents which were adopted at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro. So in my first preambulatory clause, what I'm doing is I'm taking note that this conference was held and I'm recalling the proceedings of the conference. In the next one, I'm reaffirming the position of this committee in alignment with the Rio conference. So do we get a general idea? So will you be able to deal with preambulatory clauses further? The executive board, your bureau members will help you with resolution on that day also. So be free to go and ask them any queries that you have with concerning the resolutions. So next, okay, these are some preambulatory phrases that you can use to start your preambulatory clause. Make sure that your preambulatory clause towards the end ends with a comma. All right? You need not read that as of now. It states few of them: affirming, approving, bearing in mind, believing, confident, contemplating, declaring, etc. So always you will note that these are in passive forms. The verbs have been mentioned in passive forms. I will supply to you a list of these via email. Let's move to operative clauses quickly. Operative clauses are much simpler. These deal with the active parts of the resolution that concerns to taking some decisions or making recommendations or basically the solutions that you're coming up with. If you're in a General Assembly committee or if you're in any kind of functional commission like the Commission on Narcotics and Narcotic Drugs or Sustainable Development, etc., your committee has only recommendatory powers. You can only recommend, suggest, and do any kind of thing that is more or less in a vague stature, make requests, amend in a very vague fashion. These committees do not have the authority to take decisions like the Security Council does. Security Council is the sole decision-making authority in the UN structure. So it has a mandate to do so. The other committees do not. So you also need to know what your committee can do and cannot do. Read up on this online, that what are the powers and functions of your committee or your commission that you're representing in. Each of the clauses in an operative system calls for a specific action to be taken. Okay? It begins with an active action verb in the present tense, and each operative clause ends with a semicolon. Okay? And the last operative clause in the resolution will end with a period or full stop. Is that clear? Shall I move to the next slide? So basically, operative clauses can also be like simple sentences which could be converted into action sentences or action clauses. Actually, for the benefit of everyone, I would also email this presentation to you that will help you to go through them as and when you want. Take an example of the operative clauses. Operative clauses always have to be numbered. Why? Because they show specificity in your actions. So it's something like recommends an underground repository. Okay, there's a slight mistake out here. I apologize for this. That every operative clause or every preambulatory clause has to be italicized. It has to be in italics, the first word. The one which has been provided in bold, instead of it being in bold, it has to be in italics. That's it. So recommends an underground repository to be formed in an able and willing nation, and this nation allow other nations to store nuclear waste. So this is a recommendation that your committee is making. The next clause is an expression of your committee. So, okay, let's take an example and try to change it to an operative clause. Can we have a sentence now from you all? Anything which would incorporate an action that needs to be taken? Yes, sir.
Pune Model United Nations had started in 2013.
All right. Sir, the concern being that I can convert this into a preambulatory clause. This does not end up into an operative clause, reason being that there is no action that needs to be taken. So it has happened in the past. We can convert this into a preambulatory clause, but not into an operative clause. Try modifying that a bit. Yes, ma'am?
Recommends that some body be formed.
Give me a sentence. You are already making it into an operative clause.
A body can be formed by the countries such that the unmanned drones be kept under surveillance.
All right. What are we trying to do in this? We are basically recommending the formation of a body. Okay, so what we do is recommends an international body consisting of so and so members to be formed for the purpose of surveillance of unmanned aerial vehicles. Semicolon. Okay? If we ask certain countries to do something, let's say you suggest that you want this resolution to stop, for example, USA, Iran, and Russia to use drones. So what are you going to do in this case? You're going to request these people to do it, or are you going to put it in a manner which sounds a bit more mandatory for them to do it? We would always require it to sound a bit mandatory. Why? Because this is an important action that needs to be taken. And therefore, we will replace the first word saying calls upon Iran, USA, and Russia to immediately cease usage of drones. It is very vague in nature, slightly recommendatory, but at the same time conveys the clear action that needs to be taken. Any other sentences that you want me to convert? All right, yes sir?
Recommends that the preparatory session be wrapped up.
Give me a normal sentence, let me convert it into an operative clause.
Shall we wrap up the preparatory session?
Could you repeat your sentence?
Propose formation of a body for regulating the use of aerial vehicles.
Okay, so you want to propose formation of a body, which we just did, to monitor aerial vehicles. Okay, so we can always change the operative clause over here. Now, if this is something which is very important for the world to take note and do, then we can always make it urges. Urges member states to immediately convene a conference which would end in establishing a body to deal with unmanned aerial vehicles or monitor unmanned aerial vehicles. Okay? So this manner, we can take any kind of sentence and convert it into an active verb right in the beginning, number it, italicize, put a semicolon in the end, that's your operative clause. And the last operative clause always ends with a period. So if you take note of this now, the entire resolution is one big sentence. It starts from the heading, it goes to the preambulatory clauses which uses comma. Nowhere full stop is used. The operative clauses end with semicolon, and only the last operative clause, which is the end of the resolution, has a period. So it is one huge sentence expressing the will of the entire committee, or the desire of the entire committee to do something about the topic. And that is precisely what a resolution is. It takes a stand on an issue taken by the entire set of countries. And finally, these are some operative phrases. Again, you need not take note of them immediately. I will send it out to you. And you can always refer to these demo operative phrases and clauses while you are working for the resolution. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am, towards the end. I would request this house to maintain decorum till the final question has been addressed, and then we can disperse. Yes, ma'am.
How long should a resolution be?
There is no limit for that. Resolution can be as long as possible, as short you want it to be. It's absolutely upon the willingness of your countries. Yes, ma'am. Yes, it's working.
Is there anything we need to write in the transition between the preambulatory clauses and the operative clauses, or and is there anything we need to write to end the resolution?
Nothing. The last clause could be anything, but the last clause should have a full stop. That's all. Just arrange it in such a manner that we come to know that the resolution has properly ended. Okay, so it shouldn't abruptly end in the middle of it. It should make proper grammatical sense. That's it. Yes. That would be the final question for the evening.
Is there a special procedure for the use of veto power in the Security Council?
There is no special procedure. Veto power is just saying no when the voting process happens. That's expression of your veto.
So, do we, like suppose I'm China in the council, so I will give my vote, and after that if the resolution is passed and I don't want it to pass, so I'll say veto then, or do I say veto while voting?
While voting, veto is nothing but a no vote. So when your voting turn comes in, you just have to mention yes or no. If you say a yes, you are voting in favor. If you say no, that's a veto. And if you say no, that's it. The resolution will not be voted further. And it ends there itself. All right. I'll hand the floor to Mayur for the next 2 minutes. Thank you so much for being with me this long. If you have any queries, write to me on my email and we can sort it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudranil. I'm just going to take the last 2 minutes. Just a reminder to everyone, the opening ceremony would be on the 16th of January. The time would be confirmed. Please do not send me any emails asking me if we cannot attend the opening ceremony. The opening ceremony is mandatory for all delegates. There will be a particular code that will be emailed to you against your name. So let's say my name is Mayur Ahuja. There's a code 1110. So while you enter during the opening ceremony, there will be our secretariat members. Give them your code, because if that particular code is not there, we will not be issuing you your participation certificates. We are very particular when it comes to the opening ceremony, because the opening ceremony is for the delegates, and if they don't attend, it is a form of disrespect, which is not acceptable. Also, if in case due to some reason you're not able to attend any of the sessions on the 17th and 18th January, again you will not be given your participation certificate. And the executive board members, the conference officials will be making note of this. And the last thing, if in case any of your friends are still wanting to register for this particular conference, 20th December is the last day to register. You can register on our website. If in case you all have any queries, please feel free to write to me or Rudranil. Rudranil for the research part of your preparation, and if in case you all have any concern with respect to the logistics, you can write to me. And for those who have not received the allocation, they will be receiving it by tomorrow midnight. Thank you so much for being so patient, and I hope to see you all at the opening ceremony of Pune Model Year 2015. Thank you so much.